Our first topic to cover is addressing social media harms, a public health approach to youth safety and resilience. Our first presenter is Amy Neville, who's the president of the Alexander Neville Foundation. This organization is family founded, aiming to educate and raise awareness about substance misuse and the influences of social media. Amy has shared her insights on CNN, Fox, CBS, and ABC. Her story is also shared in Rolling Stone's article Inside Snapchat's Teen Opioid Crisis. So today's presentation will review social media platforms and the associated health risks, as well as strategies to prevent those related harms. We will have an opportunity for your questions at the end of the presentation using the chat function, so we'd ask that you hold those until the end. And without further delay, please join me in welcoming Amy Neville. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. Bear with me for just a moment while I switch over to my slideshow. So the slideshow is really just my cheat sheet, so I know what it is that I'm doing, so I don't get lost. Oops. All right, so you just see my big screen, not my speaker notes. Is that correct? I'm going to take that as
Correct,
a
Amy.
yes. Thank you. Thank you. Perfect. Perfect. That's worked like I wanted it to. I'd like to think I always know what I'm doing, but sometimes, it just doesn't work the way you think it will. Again, my name's Amy, and yeah, I'm the president of the Alexander Neville Foundation. It is a foundation that was founded after the death of my 14-year-old son, Alexander, which I'll tell you a little bit more about him in just a moment. Everything we do is rooted in the youth voice. I work with teens all across the country to put together what it is that I should be telling their peers, what it is they want me to tell their parents and their community. And I love that format. We fell into it by accident. I started off by talking to all of the big brains that you can imagine, law enforcement, medical folks, U.S. attorneys, all spectrum of people that could help influence the work. And it was really fantastic. But when it came time to actually start creating, something was still missing, and it was that youth voice. And after my first youth listening session, I was like, oh, this is where it's at. These are the people that really know what's going on, and that these are the people I really want to help. So that is how we started working with young people. So our objectives today, so we are going to get in the impact of social media on youth mental health, behavioral health, and talking about the risk associated with self-harm, eating disorders, substance misuse, and of course, suicide. Talk about the major players and the harms that are specific to them. But I will say the harms happen across all platforms, but some just excel at others better than the rest. We're going to talk about how to recognize warning signs of online exploitation, which is often looks a lot just like being a moody teenager, unfortunately. Uh, and then we're going to talk about some evidence-based strategies that health professionals, parents, and communities can use to foster healthy social media use and then prevent harms in youth and families. So that's really what it's about, is all about prevention. So first I got to talk about Alex, right? He lived for 14 years, and I swear I could talk about him for at least that amount of time. He was a pretty typical 14-year-old, had, big ideas about the world. The kid loved to learn about World War II, Civil War, Pokemon, whatever it was, whatever he was interested in, he learned it intently and loved to share that information with other people. He was skateboarding all the time. He was in scouts. He liked scouts. He liked the adventure side of scouts, going out and camping and all the things associated with that. Not so much the merit badge side. That felt a little too much like school for him, and his relationship with school was definitely contentious. He was one of those kiddos that, could pass the test with A's and then not do any homework, because why should I do homework if I can pass the test? Which that's not a bad argument, but it's just not how, unfortunately, that's not how the rules work, right? And then he was a little entrepreneur. He was selling off his toys on eBay, his toys from his childhood, which he was so organized at. Like if he only put that effort into school, he at school probably would have gone a lot easier, but it's not where his interests were. And of course, we were close with Alex. In fact, we always thought this kiddo was going to have the experimental phase, and we thought we were prepared for that. We had the big conversations, and As he got older, those conversations became more and more mature. And then one day in June of 2020, there was this run of a few days where things were really off. And I went to him and I asked him, I said, okay, dude, like, what is going on? Are you using something? And it was, no, mom, I was up late. I ate something bad, height of puberty. So I let it go that day. But it was a day and a half later, he came back to me and he's like, okay, I need to talk to you guys. Long story short, he was like, I wanted to experiment with Oxy, got it from a dealer on Snapchat. It has a hold on me and I don't know why. We sprang into action. We called a treatment place to get him in. They needed to call me back. That night he died. Uh, Everything happened really fast. And I really feel social media was the catalyst for it was like gasoline on a wildfire, and that is, even though in the early days I still felt like it was a one-off thing that happened in our family, but it was as I met more and more families, I realized, oh my gosh, there's just so much more to this that social media is playing a part in, and we need to talk about it. Like a little bit of information would have gone a long way in our house that night, and I think we would have had different results, but here we are. I got to start with stigma. I go into it's wild. People say wild things to me. I've had people tell me to my face that my kid's dead just simply because I'm a bad parent. Um, Maybe that'd be easy to accept, but I don't believe that's the case. I have a daughter that proves otherwise. She definitely is a boost to my self-esteem. Uh, and people, like, you gave your kid access, everything goes back on the parent. It's really easy to blame the parent. I get it. People get really uncomfortable with the thought of something like this even happening, and so it's easy to have something to blame, and the parent is a very easy target in this situation. But it's like I don't beat myself up every day over it, right? um, and then there's also this defense of social media companies. People really defend big tech. They defend these billionaires who have created a product that is highly addictive. And I don't know if you guys are paying attention to the news right now, but there is the first social media lawsuit trial started last week. Jury was selected. As of today, though, it's had to break for a couple of days because Meta's lead attorney is ill, has fallen ill. So whatever that means. So we'll see where that goes. Um, so it's interesting. And there's a microsite. If anybody's interested, I could share the link. There's a microsite that has all the evidence that's being presented, and it's very damning. I mean, think these are the tobacco trials of our time, for sure. But the other stigma I want people to really consider is there's the stigma against teens right now. About, oh, kids these days, they're always on their phone. Kids these days, they need to touch grass. Oh, they're just being a moody teenager. And that's just, it's not their fault. It's not our fault either, because these companies sold us a bill of goods. They gave us this bright new shiny thing, and it was cool and different, and people really didn't know what to expect. And unfortunately, we've seen the dark side now, and now that we know better, we need to do better, and we need to give these kiddos um, a chance and figure out how to help them through it. And it's not. I've met kids with social media addiction. It's gnarly, you guys, and it's something that we're gonna have to figure out as a society to work through together. All right. So why social media, right? And a lot of what I'm saying actually applies to adults too. As we talk, you might think of things like, oh yeah, I kind of remember that, or something came up in your feed, and you can maybe easily see where things might take a dark turn. I have no idea why my algorithm started, because I'm a sucker for a cute dog video, honestly. Uh, but my algorithm started showing me animal abuse videos. Like, oh, I don't know how in the it started off looking cute, like it's like a trap. It brings you in and then it shows you something else. I was able to fix it quickly, but you just never know when things will come up. So it's where we connect, right? It's where all of us connect. Now, there's many families in my shoes that have lost a child to a social media harm that want to take social media away. I realize that that's not a realistic expectation, right? I do think it can be safe, and that's what I really like to see. I like the fact that when when I was a little kid, we moved away from Nebraska, never talked to my aunts, uncles, cousins, all those people, never saw them like ever again. And then along comes Facebook, and suddenly I'm connected to them. We're back in each other's lives. And that is something that I like. But the dark is really bad. So those secrets, disappearing messages is why drug dealers like it. That's why sexual predators like it, extortionists like it, on Snapchat especially, is Snap is designed that way to have the disappearing messages. And then Facebook, Instagram, the rest all have a dark mode that you can set it on so you can set your messages to disappear and have that kind of anonymity. Currently, there's no accountability for these companies. There is no laws on the books, no to protect them. They do not have a duty of care. So I'm just going to assume you don't know what that means. I didn't know what that meant until we started working. I started working in this space. But a duty of care. So let's say, for example, in your town, there's a hotel, and that hotel is running a sex trafficking ring. And the owner of that hotel knows that it's happening, but turns a blind eye to that. When that sex trafficking ring gets busted, that owner can be held to the same level of accountability as the sex traffickers. So I'd like to see that level of accountability help put on these companies, because these CEOs, these executives have known for a very long time that these harms are there. Um, but to do something about it would implement changes on their platforms that would decrease usage from users, which would of course decrease profits. And so they made a choice, right? Profits over people. It keeps people disconnected from reality. So what's happening on social media? It's either somebody's best day ever or worst day ever. It's never just normal life. And well, when I talk to kiddos, they know it's not real. They know that's not a real life somebody's presenting, but yet they want that. There's still this compulsion to want to look like the Kardashians, have the best muscles, to be the skinniest, have the best makeup, all the things. And so that takes a toll on somebody's mental health. And then of course the gamification. If you're somebody that keeps your notifications on and you get those notifications, you know what I'm talking about. I'm sorry, that keeps you coming back. And then of course the games that you get the notification that says, hey, don't forget to show up to get your streak or your snap streak or how many ever days in a row so you can earn that reward. And so that gives that dopamine hit, and kiddos especially, end up becoming reliant on that dopamine hit. All right, so let's talk a little bit about how it works, right? So first of all, there's the algorithm. That algorithm is strictly designed to keep you scrolling, to keep you hooked on there for as long as you can. Like I'm sure many of you can think of an example of a night where maybe you should have been sleeping, but instead you picked up your phone for that one last look at whatever, and next thing you know, it's 45 minutes, an hour later, and you're like, what just happened? I can think of that. I don't know why the algorithm knew I would watch I Dream a Genie videos, but I swear I can't never forget that night. I was like 45 minutes later, I'm like, what just happened? Like, how did I get sucked into this I Dream a Genie tornado? I don't even watch I Dream a Genie. I don't know what happened. I don't know why I knew I wanted to do that, but then I was up later. Messes up your sleep. And so these kiddos, the same thing's happening to them. I've talked to a lot of kiddos who they get up to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night and they check their phone. And then they go into that spiral in the middle of the night and they're not getting the sleep that they need. As you all know, teens need lots and lots of sleep. Uh, those dopamine hits, those likes, the views, all the comments that gets our brain wanting that those happy chemicals, and which can create that addiction. And in kiddos especially, they can end up having dopamine depletion and then become reliant on that dopamine from these apps. I remember a presentation that I did, and I was at a high school. And in my presentation, we show a PSA style documentary that we made, and it's only about 25 minutes. And I went to the back of the room, and there was this kiddo, and he kept pulling out his phone and pulling out his phone and pulling out it, kept looking at it, looking at it, looking at it. Complete compulsion. I really think he had no idea that he was doing it. I set an interval timer to see how often he was doing it, and he was taking his phone out of his pocket every 30 to 35 seconds. It was wild watching him. And then, of course, there's the dark patterns. I just talked about the infinite scroll. Notifications, those are to keep you coming back for more. Those For You pages that you have, like where it shows you the videos that it's suggesting to you, those aren't necessarily what you like. Yeah, some are based on your interest, but it's also things that are going to keep you on the app as long as they can, so they can make money off of you for as long as they can. Um, and collectively, we're worth a lot of money, right? So I'm going to show you a video clip here from the film Can't Look Away. This is Charles. He is a TikTok whistleblower, and he's going to share some info with us.
I was actually quite proud to work at the company because I was part of this big mission. Then in the summer of 2021, I saw a Wall Street Journal article testing how TikTok is creating echo chambers, especially for young people that really have a significant negative impact. So I started my personal experiment, screen recording a new account to see how much time it takes for me to then be personally affected by these videos.
In Germany, we don't say.
TikTok is designed for you to spend more and more time on the app. And with every minute that you're on, there are 3 to 4 advertisement slots in your feed. So TikTok earns money with you spending more time on the platform. The algorithm identifies how much time you spend on a single video. You could have searched for inspirational quotes, but in the end, your feed is not reflecting what you searched for, it's what you spend time on. So I could see 6 videos that I just swiped through. And the 7th one has a really sad message, and I spent time on it. It took me 15 minutes with just a few triggers of likes and comments under different postings to make sure that my feed was just dark quotes, breakup content, and even people motivating others to support self-harm or eat disorders. When I saw these videos over and over in my For You feed, they had an impact on me. And I still remember a few days where I was just sitting right before midnight in front of my feed crying. I tried contacting a guy in London that was high in the hierarchy of the company, sending him my example of the screen recording and saying, hey, can you have a look into this? But he didn't even give me a single answer while I was at the company. I think TikTok as an app has a positive side when it comes down to impacting culture. But what I see is that the platform is really not a safe environment for anybody within the young audience.
So as you can see, he reported it and it didn't go anywhere. Just a little side note, I'll give you a link to where you can watch the full length film at the end, but Charles ends up getting fired and for expense account fraud, to which he sued and they ended up settling out of court. Just a little side note there. Take it for whatever that's worth, right? So let's talk about what social media really is. We all think of these apps as these free products that we put on our phone, but the reality is we're the product. Once we start engaging with that, we become the product that they are making money off of. They're selling our attention all day, every day on there. Teens are especially the target. They are worth billions and billions of dollars because they are online the most. And so to turn that demographic off or to limit it, would be upsetting to these companies because they would not have the finances that they have now. In fact, it was Net Choice is a lobbying group that defends big tech, and I was listening to an interview, and they said, "Well, if there's been some some legislation that was passed in California and a couple of other states where Net Choice lobbies and says, well, if we implement these laws, it will cause irreversible damage to these companies." And I would argue that they don't understand what irreversible damage looks like. I can show them irreversible damage. They'll bounce back. The tobacco companies did, the automobile industry did. Anybody that's been regulated like this comes back. So I'm really not worried about them having irreversible damage. And the more we scroll, the more ads they show, and that's really where they make their money. All those different ads, every little click that we do. And then you guys, I'm sure some of you you've maybe clicked on a pair of shoes or something you looked at, and next thing you know, it's following you around on all across the internet. That's where they're making their money, from those ads like that. They track everything. It's so interesting to me because one of big tech's arguments with why they can't regulate and why they can't do certain things is because they need to protect people's privacy. the reality is they know everything about us. They know everything that we're doing. They know when we're hungry. They know when we're feeling bad based on the things that we're doing online. They know where we are because they geofence the areas. You've probably been in an area, next thing you know, you get an ad for something that's near you. They know. So, protecting our privacy, I don't really buy it because they know a lot about us. If they were protecting our privacy, they wouldn't be selling our data.
And tweens are.
Oops, sorry. I'm going to show you a little, this is Matt Bergman. He's the lead attorney at the Social Media Victims Law Center. I love this man. I can tell you more about him toward the end if you want to learn anything about him, but he's not charging us. He is not, I mean, if there's a win in a lawsuit, yes, they're taking a cut of that. But if we walk away with nothing, they walk away with nothing. His heart is in this. And I couldn't be more grateful for him. Whoops. Here we go. I messed it up. Here we go.
And tweens are herd animals. If you look at cigarette company internal documents from the 70s and 80s, they said things like the base of our business is the high school student, and today's teenager is tomorrow's potential regular customer. And they knew that smokers start in their teens. And they actively marketed their addictive products toward minors through things like Joe Camel, knowing that those were going to be their lifetime customers. In the case of social media, you have internal Facebook documents released by Frances Haugen saying tweens are herd animals. Kids have an addict's narrative. Our products make girls feel worse about themselves. You have the same kind of corporate misconduct, knowing disregard of the life and safety of others, and a intentional decision to put profits over people.
So there you have it, right from our attorney. So let's talk a little bit about the major players. So we've got Meta, which is Instagram and Facebook, and also WhatsApp, and then the whole metaverse AI situation. Then there's TikTok, which is just the short form videos, and then Snapchat, which has the disappearing messages. That's the big ones, right? We also consider, like, we're also, when it comes to social media, think YouTube. YouTube, there's communication features on there where you can comment and things like that. Those can suck people in. Discord, which is the video gaming, gamers usually get on it to talk to each other. And then, of course, video games themselves all have chat features and things. So anything really where other people can connect with you or connect with your kiddo are the things that we're really talking about. But we're going to go ahead and start with Meta. So Meta, they're really known for sextortion. 3 years ago now, Frances Haugen is the one who came out, the whistleblower that really changed everything in this space. That's where Matt saw Frances Haugen testify, and that's when he realized we got to do something. And so she took documents when she left Meta that showed what was going on and ended up testifying in front of the US Senate talking about these things. Now, I will say there's been numerous Senate hearings and House hearings in the last almost 6 years since Alex has been gone, and nothing has changed. I just want to give you that perspective. It's getting frustrating that, like, what more do we need to do at this point? The evidence is there. We need to make something happen. But anyway, 75% of all adult to minor connections come from Facebook. Something to think about there. David Erb came out stating that there is a software program that can keep fake profiles from happening, but Meta will not implement it because it will cause a decline in new users. So they insist that self-regulation is the only approach. These companies that we're not allowed to see their internal documents. No one's allowed to audit them. We just have to take their word for everything that they're doing right. And they insist that they should be allowed to self-regulate. Instagram is known for its disordered eating content, especially among young girls. We're going to take a little closer look at all of these. Again, sextortion is a big one there. Whoops, now my little thing's not working. There we go. So let's talk about the sextortion. So as you can see there, from October to March of 21 to 23, there's over 13,000 reports of online financial sextortion of minors. And so what I mean by that is that somebody contacted a kiddo. How it usually works is somebody contacts a kiddo and says, hey, uh, this is usually boys. It's the fastest growing online harm among young men right now, among our teen boys. It's, hey, uh, cute girl, you're cute. They talk for a little bit, and then it becomes, uh, let's exchange pictures. And so the boy sends the picture and is like, haha, got you. Now send me money. And, the underdeveloped teen brain, it's impulsive. Some of these boys feel like there's no way out and they're scared. And it a lot of times happens in a really short span of time. Uh, and then some of these have led to suicides. There's been over 30 suicides related to this extortion in the last couple of years. And it's primarily boys. These sextortionists, they can see your kid's profile, they see who they're connected to, they see the sports team they're on, they see mom and dad, they see the things they're connected to, and they threaten them with, hey, um, I'm going to go tell your friends, your coach, whoever. I'm going to send these pictures to them. And of course, they freak out. And it's really scary. The reality is, the remedy to that is to ignore it. For these kiddos to just ignore it. If they're taking too much time with this kiddo, they're not exploiting somebody else. They're going to move on to the next victim. And then also, of course, reporting it is always a great thing to do. And hopefully something gets taken care of with it. When I talk to kiddos, it's interesting. So when I give presentations in schools and we talk about this, I'll have at least one kiddo come up and be like, that happened to me. I didn't know that was a thing. Like I thought that only happened, I was the only one. And but they ended up chose to ignore it, or maybe they went to their family. But kiddos that don't go to their family, the overwhelming response is, well, I don't want them to be mad at me. I'm embarrassed. I disappointed my parents. But as parents, I know a lot of times when things happen in this space, our reaction is like, why would you do that? When we need to reframe our thinking and be like, what would lead my kid to do something like that? And really try to collect the facts from that perspective rather than putting it on our kiddo right away. And it's hard. We're parents. I always try to get kiddos to like, your parents are flawed. I'm sorry to tell you this. We're flawed. We always want to do what's best for you, but sometimes we don't think clearly. So let's talk about the disordered eating. So as you can see, the hospitalizations for eating disorders doubled among adolescent girls during the pandemic, and it's still skyrocketing. It's still at an all-time high. 1 in 3 girls felt worse about themselves because of the app of Instagram in particular. And so let me give you an example here. So, and this is a real world example. Her name's Katie. I work with her mom. Her mom's amazing. Katie's amazing. She's done some work for me. She's really fantastic. But she plays soccer. It's summer. She is looking for a soccer workout on Instagram to keep up her skills throughout the summer. Reasonable thing to do. And she gets totally normal content at first. But what happens is that normal content starts to get a little bit edgier and it starts to push extreme dieting. Maybe it's advertising diet pills. And over time, it starts to look like the norm and everybody's doing it. And there's ads for, people, how to eat 500 calories safely, how to hide your disordered eating from your parents, how to hide it from your doctor when your parents take you to the doctor. And then, anorexia coaches start to reach out to you and they can help coach you to how to be anorexic healthy, which that doesn't exist. There's a really great article out there, a great study from Fair Play for Kids on the anorexia bubble, as it's called, that you could check out if you want to go deeper into that. But it's that layering in and breaking down of the sensibilities over time that gets our kids to fall into these traps that they never thought they'd do before, we never thought they'd do before, and gets them there. I know in Katie's case, her parents didn't notice right away because Katie was learning how to hide it. But she started looking sick and she almost actually ended up dying from it. And then while Katie was in the hospital, her mom, her grandpa sent an article to the mom saying, an article in like the New York Times about this disordered eating that's happening on Instagram. And so they immediately went to her social media and it was covered in all of this stuff that we're talking about. And so the other thing too, uh, there's a book, Careless People. I highly recommend everybody read it. Uh, Even better, listen to it. The woman does an amazing job of telling her story. Sarah Wynne Williams wrote this, and she is another Facebook whistleblower. But in there, she talks about how they could pinpoint the exact moment a young lady was feeling bad about themselves so they could advertise beauty products or diet products or whatever companies wanted. That was part of their advertising pitch to people who wanted to advertise on their platform. And so a young lady puts out pictures nobody likes or comments, or maybe people are saying mean things, so she removes it. In comes the beauty ads, in comes all these ads to try to make her feel better about herself. And so they figured out early on how to exploit that. And Sarah talks about that in her book. And again, it's really good. Like I could not stop. I was listening to it. I could not stop listening to it. Um, it's wild. I keep thinking we like it can't get any more wild, and then something else comes out. So let's talk about TikTok. TikTok is known for its dangerous challenges. So like the blackout challenge, if you know what that's the blackout challenge, the choking challenge, pass out challenge, just where they kiddos make themselves pass out. Um, I can remember that from when I was growing up. People would do it in a group. Nowadays, kiddos are doing it alone in their bedrooms, and that's really where, I mean, it's scary to begin with, but it gets even scarier when they're alone doing it. The Benadryl, where kids take a bunch of Benadryl. You've probably heard stories about kids doing that at school and being found. The subway surfing is a newer one. New York City. Uh, there's a way to get down on, and then try to get on top of the subways, and so kids have lost their lives to that. And then of course the suicide, the self-harm, the depression content that happens, and we're going to dive into that one here first. So you guys probably know a lot of this already, but suicide is the second leading cause of death among people ages 10 to 24, which is wild. uh and it's increased like it's wildfire, right? But 62% in 2021. And we know it's even getting worse. And um, social media likes to tell us that they're not the problem, that there's no proof, there's no direct link. Their studies show that there's no direct link, that type of thing. But the evidence is there and the studies are coming out. Another great book you could read is The Anxious Generation, if you haven't read that already. Jonathan Haidt is amazing. He did a panel, if you wanted to go back and watch that, at World Mental Health Day in New York City back in October. I was fortunate enough he invited me to participate in that with him on the panel after his presentation. And it's great. If you haven't read it or watched any of his stuff, I highly recommend him. You will learn a lot from him into the great details about the brain and everything. But what happens, of course, is it's either the bullying, right? The increased screen time, now they're getting on the bullies, all that negative content's coming to them. The pressures of trying to keep up with everybody else and never feeling good enough because all these people are having this great time over here and you're home alone, like they've forgotten about you. And then, of course, cyberbullying is a huge problem still. It's probably like the original, right? The original social media harm. In fact, we looked for those things when we would spot check Alex's social media, and I always look for like sexual predator types and people bullies, and that was about the extent of all that I looked for, unfortunately. But these things are all very real, and so how it typically happens is uh, in the film, the Can't Look Away. There's Mason. He's an example of one of the ways, and it's the he was depressed. He had just had a breakup. And so he was looking for his search engine. His search shows that he was looking for inspirational quotes. And what he got fed was anything but harmful content. You should be dead. All of those types of things, to where he ended up taking his own life. Again, it's not that our kids ever started out intending that or wanting that. It just starts to feed into that, and you start to spiral, and it's hard to come out of that. And unfortunately, that impulse control, the thinking that they're disappointing everybody, unfortunately wins out. We're going to see a short clip about some kiddos right here. Just warning, it's going to talk about suicide.
Riley died by suicide on March 30th, 2021, after he was targeted through Facebook Messenger by a sextortionist who got him to send compromising images and then blackmailed him.
This is my son, Mason. He will have been gone for a year and about 2 weeks. On November the 14th, 1 year. I can't bring my son back, but I sure can do whatever I can to make sure that no other mother has to go through it. We have gone through it.
I'm Brandy Roberts. This is my husband, Tony Roberts.
Hi, and thank you all for having us.
We lost our daughter, England, in September of 2020.
This is a video of a lady with an extension cord around her neck tied to the top hinge of the door frame. And that's how we found our daughter. It's on Instagram right now.
So as you see, 3 very different ways: sextortion, the depression, and then just being fed pro-suicide content over and over again led to England's depression and ultimately her death. And a lot of times, people are like, well, these are outliers. I'm like, no, they're not outliers. This is a thing. These are real things that are happening on the regular through these platforms right now. All right, so let's talk about my favorite, my nemesis, Snapchat. So as you take a look at those pictures there, you'll see a 45-year-old woman's feed versus a 14-year-old boy's feed. And in the boy's feed, you can see their suggestive images. And then in the woman's feed, there's, cute babies, a TV ad, pretty harmless. Now, as an adult, you can try all that you want to try to see if you can get your feed to look like that 14-year-old boy's feed. And it most likely will not happen, because especially if you didn't lie about your age, if you want to have your real age in there. And that's because they can infer our ages based on who our friends are, the stuff that we interact with. So even let's say that 14-year-old boy put in that he was a 45-year-old man. Based on his friend group, based on the things he's looking at, it will eventually infer his age and almost to a T, and start pushing them content that they would push to that age group, and that keeps them engaged. So it's really crazy. It's crazy. It's sick, actually, in my opinion. So Snapchat, in my opinion, I say in my opinion because since I am in a lawsuit against them, I think if you go out and do your own research, it'll be your opinion too. So let's talk about the drug dealers, right? The National Crime Prevention Council 2 years ago now estimated that 80% of the drug deaths, adolescent drug deaths, were coming through social media. And, kiddos, we're actually at a low of teen drug use, a low that we haven't seen in a really long time. But the death rate has been higher because of how lethal the drugs are, the fentanyl, which I won't go into that. Hopefully you guys know a lot about that. But if you want to know more, call me. I will talk about all of these things all day, every day. It's my life. And then fentanyl is involved in 84% of teen overdose deaths. Most of the families prefer that we say fentanyl poisonings instead of overdose. I don't have a preference either way, but poisoning we feel like is more accurate because, what's the recommended dose of illicit fentanyl, right? There isn't one. UCLA was showing that there was 22 school-age children dying each week from fentanyl, which is crazy. To me, that's a huge number. Again, we know those numbers are going down, and I think education awareness has a large part to do with that. I know that a lot of awareness is helping, and that's what the kids are saying. Is like, okay, we're learning about these things now. I know that we have slowed down the fentanyl that's coming into the country, but it's still here. And just side note here too, in the state that I live in Arizona, meth is actually killing more people than fentanyl right now. So it's whack-a-mole, right? So we stopped paying attention over here to all these other drugs because we've been so laser focused on fentanyl. Now we've got this problem with meth that's increasing. And so we need to just keep a 360 view on everything that's going on, which is a huge ask, right? We only have so many resources and so many hours in a day, but as soon as, we start focusing on meth, it's going to be something else. So we got to figure out how to do the whole landscape. And I don't have the answer to that. I think about it all the time. I wish I did have the answer. then a lot of times these kiddos do not realize that they're taking that the pill is counterfeit. Now, when I first started this work in my very first listening session, kiddos didn't know about fentanyl. They didn't know, they thought these pills, they didn't understand that the pills online are counterfeit, first of all. And then they didn't understand that they were actually made with an illicit substance. And so that Oxy was Oxy, Adderall was Adderall, and so on, right? And nowadays, the drug dealers are advertising fentanyl along with all the other drugs. So they think fentanyl is its own drug, Oxy is Oxy, Adderall is Adderall, Xanax is Xanax, and so on. They still don't understand that it's mixed into it's the other things are all counterfeited, made with fentanyl. The other thing that happens a lot too is, oh, they're my friend, they'd never do that to me. And we know that's not the reality, right? I always tell these kiddos, like, if somebody is offering you drugs, they're not your friend. They do not care about you. Even if it's been your best friend since preschool, something's changed and they probably need help. And let's help them. Let's help them. Uh, it's a lot. These kids are easily manipulated by these drug dealers. These dealers come in and they groom them. And this is information like from my listening sessions. They groom them. They tell them they're smart, funny, amazing, all these great things about them, and then they get our kids doing things they never thought they'd do before. All right, so we're gonna watch a couple of clips from Can't Look Away from our the forensic evidence collector guy. Shoot, I can't think of his title. Jason Tanner's his name. Why can't I think of his title? I feel so bad. I talk to him like every other day, I swear. Talking about how it works on Snapchat.
If you were to ask me, out of the hundreds of cases that I look at and I review evidence, if it has anything to do with drugs, it's going to be on Snapchat. This is where it is 90% of the time. Snap is useful when you don't want people to see what you're doing. So you see here, chats delete immediately, or I can change that to 24 hours from now, delete all that conversation, right? This is what Snap Map looks like. But you can see, like, let's say I'm a dealer, I can easily locate you and, hey, I'm going to be at the park around the corner. You can come meet me here. God, it's like platform was built for that.
So if you have kiddos that have Snapchat, and yeah, it might be a struggle, at least turn off the Snap Map. The Snap Map is a bad tool. I mean, you can see where anybody is anytime. If they go live on Snapchat, anyone can contact them through the live. Anyone, complete strangers, doesn't matter. Snap has the best locating services. Like, you can be out in your front yard, turn your phone completely off, go up to your room, and it's going to pinpoint exactly where you are. It's really amazing. So just things to keep in mind when using that app. Snapchat actually started out as a sexting app called Peekaboo that Evan Spiegel and made with his friends while they were in college, because they wanted a way to delete compromising pictures they were taking of women when they were passed out drunk. And then they realized that mostly like teenagers, young teenagers were using the app, so they rebranded it as Snapchat. Just an example of some of the kiddos. I have banners filled with victims, Snapchat victims. We've taken a lot of different action against them through protest and, of course, the lawsuit, and just trying to keep that public pressure on as much as we can, because I think that public pressure ultimately is going to be what changes these things. But for now, we just keep going. So let's talk about why kiddos don't go to their trusted adult. And this is coming from kiddos in our listening session. So first off, they don't want to lose their access, right? If I'm a kid, I come to you with a problem, well, now I'm taking Snapchat away. You don't get to have these things because of these dangers, which makes perfect sense to all of us adults. I get it. But now you've got this whole other set of problems. So what is the plan? Like, can you come up with a family plan or whatever, if you're working with teens, like, how do we work with this? How do you want this to be handled when these things happen? Obviously, they're embarrassed, especially if sextortion is involved or if they're getting bullied, because there's that instant feeling of, like, as a parent, we want to protect our kid. We got to go tell somebody. We got to go to the school and tell them you have this bully, whatever it is. And sometimes that could make the issues worse. I really think in planning the to-dos, like what could we do as a family in the event of these things, we have to involve our teens in those conversations. It's hard, and it ultimately stems from the fact that they don't tell us because they think that we're going to overreact, which I already talked about, like, oh my gosh, why would you do that? Why is this happening? I'm calling their mom, whatever it is. Um, and then we might make things even worse for them. And they just think that we can't relate to them right now. And I'm 52 years old. My daughter is 17. My teenage years were probably closer to my grandmother's, who was born, in the 20s than my own daughters. And that's because of technology. Yeah, they're worried about things getting escalated. And of course, again, this might be that if your kiddo's not on social media yet, there's a pre-convo. If then scenarios. If this happens, then we're doing this. If this happens, then we're doing this. And your kiddo knows the big picture of what's happening. Of course, there's that peer pressure. Uh, there's so much peer pressure to to show up in these spaces, because if you don't, you're missing out on something that maybe happened overnight, and now everybody at school knows, and you show up and you're dumb for not knowing certain things. And then of course they don't recognize it as a harm. It's just part of being online. And I'm like, you wouldn't let somebody like take their clothes off in front of you. So why accept a nude photo from some grown man across the country? Report those things. Really getting our kids, find where the reporting functions are on these apps and use them. I will say one thing that these companies do is that if you report something, it is anonymous. Now, of course, that's really difficult. If it's only between them and that one person, then they're obviously going to know who reported it. But typically that's happening with multiple people. So they should feel pretty safe and protected in all of that. So how do we make them feel safe? Oh, we got to stay calm, right? It's hard. I remember when Alex came to pour his heart out to us the night before he died, and he's like, I got to talk to you guys. And of course, I wanted to just hold him and like, oh my God, I can't believe this is happening. And I was overcome with emotion on the inside, and I was doing my best to stay calm on the outside. And I had questions, and so I'd ask questions, and he would just start to shut down. So I stopped asking questions because I wanted him to get everything out that he could possibly needed to get out. And then take action, right? That was the path we were on. They need to know that they won't be punished for being honest. I know that's a fine line, because what if they did something really bad? What if they harmed somebody else, maybe unintentionally, maybe intentionally? And how do you handle that? What's the line? But again, that's something that you have to really decide as a family. And then that we're going to help without taking over a situation or overreacting. And maybe it's my hang up on the overreacting. I'm a spaz, if you haven't noticed. And so sometimes I overreact in the good ways and in the bad ways. And then later on, I chill out and figure it out. But so what can you do as a family, or do as the adult in a young person's life, to help get them through that? In the gentlest way possible. It's so hard. It's interesting. I have we run a Parents Connection Academy, redefining parenting in the digital age. It's a 5-week thing that we do locally. And right now we're doing it with foster families. And we started talking about the social media stuff right in the beginning. And this gentleman says, well, it's my house, my rules. I could just take the phone away. And he tells me all these different things. I'm like, okay, I can't argue with that. It's his house, his rules. And so the course is over, and I get an email from their family about the situation they're in at their home, and they need help with their teen who's addicted to social media. And so how are we going to do that in the kindest, gentlest way possible? Because she is a foster child for them. It's their niece. The parents been taken away from the parents. And how do we get her through that with the least amount of damage possible? So we're working through that right now. But it was just interesting but you know what? It took him to have to trust me, I think, to open up like that. He was guarded on the issues. And then once he trusted me, after seeing me 5, 6 times, they were ready to have a conversation about it. So how do we develop a healthier relationship with social media? So it really setting boundaries, right? So time. set the phone to turn off screen times. I have kiddos who show me, I'll get the kiddos to like, show me how much time you spend on your phone because you can look at the apps. And then some kids are like 3 hours, some kids are like 10 hours, some kids are like, oh, how in the world did I even get 15 hours in on my phone in one day? Crazy, right? And so they can start being mindful, bring it to their attention on how much time they're spending. Same thing goes for adults. Curate your feed, follow the positive content, look at inspiring accounts, like them, follow them, spend time on them, comment on them. But as soon as you stop doing those things, the negative stuff's going to creep back in quickly. So it's a little bit of a job, but maintain that, looking at the good stuff. Practice mindfulness before scrolling. Like, should I be doing this right now? Did my mom tell me to take out the trash? Should I be doing my homework? Does my little brother or sibling dog need attention? Whatever it is. Engaging with meaningful content, not just the passive scroll. We're all guilty of it. I get it. Take breaks, maybe setting a timer. I'm going to do this for 20 minutes and then I'm getting over here on my homework or whatever it is I need to do. And then be critical of what you see. Avoid those comparisons. We need to ask ourselves, remind ourselves, this isn't real, right? This isn't real. We don't need to buy into this. It's just what is getting attention. And then a lot of times once we realize they're taking our attention, we're able to move past it quicker. So for adults, again, modeling those behaviors. I talk to a lot of elementary school kids, and a very different conversation, obviously, but we talk about phones and usage and all that, and then we challenge each other for a duty for a family game night. Like challenge your family to do a family game night, and it becomes, oh, my dad always says he needs his phone. My dad can't put his phone down, and that's hard. It's hard for these kiddos when they see it because they think that's the expectation, right? That's what we can do. Have open conversations about your own online experiences. Has somebody sent you an inappropriate picture or anything like that happen? Let them know that it's real and that you yourself have seen it or experienced it. Talk to them about the dangers of social media. And sometimes it's maybe a little tricky, but instead of being like, hey, this is happening on social media, or let me see your feed, ask them what they already know. Hey, have you seen drugs on Snapchat? Or ask them, do you know where teens are getting drugs? Like, what's the number one app for teens for getting drugs? And they might just tell you. Our teens love it when they're able to know more than us, and you're giving them that opportunity to educate you, and they really might open up. I found that that tends to work. Use the parental controls. They're not perfect on these apps, but there's something and it's better than nothing. So definitely put those in place. And then focus on the real world connections, of course, whether it's taking the walk, it's going out for coffee with your friends and taking your kiddos with you. However that looks in your life, the real world things that you like to do, and go to them. I like to go to farmers markets and things, and I drag my family outside every Saturday, whether we buy anything or not, just to be outside, just to walk around and to break up the inside routine. I already kind of talked about all this already. I don't think I need to get into it so much because I covered it. Just change is slow. It has been, again, it's been really slow. Anytime they make a change, it's in response to some kind of public outcry. And they're usually just Band-Aid fixes when we need major surgery. So when you see those changes being advertised or promoted in the news, whatever, take a minute and really think about what's the motivation behind it and see if you can find out more. Because typically I can't think of a scenario where it hasn't happened, but when the studies happen on these, they end up not working. Another example of what we're up against. And that first one, the TikTok attorney speaking on behalf of other defendants that include Google, Snapchat, and Meta. The judge asks, don't you have a duty to keep kids safe? And the attorney replies that no such duty exists under the law, that the duty does not exist under law. And then in that Vermont versus Meta, Meta lied in their testimony. They claimed that lying under oath was their First Amendment right. So again, that's what we're up against. So wait as long as you can to put your kiddos on social media. If your kid's on there, follow what they're following. It's part of the deal. So you can at least see some of the things that they're experiencing a couple times a week. Check their algorithm, check their recommended content, and see what's in there. And remember that if you see something bad in there, that doesn't mean they followed it. It can mean that that's what the algorithm is pushing to them. So don't blame them for that. Have them follow drug prevention. They can follow us. Design It For Us is a group that is a teen advocacy group that is fighting social media. They're amazing. The Wellness and Prevention Center puts out really great tips. There's a lot of great things that your kids could follow to help curate that positive feed. So the other great resources are the DEA. You can find that drug emoji code. Just type in DEA drug emoji code. A 2-page PDF will pop up. And then those websites there are all other places to learn more. There's a lot of great. If you want to learn something specific, you need to get pointed in a direction, reach out to me. I'm happy to get you there. Legislation. There's a few things going on out there. If you're into that sort of thing, I recommend you learn about them. But right now, there's nothing solid happening in this space. To learn more about the social media crisis on Snapchat, Gone in a Snap, you could scan that QR code and it will take you to an article in Rolling Stone magazine done by an investigative reporter, Paul Solotharov, and it really gets into the details of what's going on in that space. He did a really amazing job with that article. And then scrolling to death, that's just a QR code to take you to Nikki's podcast. Nikki is actually covering the big tech trial right now that's happening and does updates every single day. She's phenomenal. I love her. I highly recommend checking her out and listening to what she's got going on. We have our Snapchat lawsuit, which is in discovery right now. Alexander is one of the cases being worked up for trial, and we should be in court probably this time next year. Other great resources, I pretty much covered all of them already. Something else that's going on is we have Social Media Victims Remembrance Day on June 23rd. We did a big event in DC last year. We're doing it this year. That is the day we lost Alexander. June 23rd is also the day that the bride family lost their son Carson. Alexander and Carson died via the same platform, same day, different harms. This is my daughter. I'm going to show you a quick little video of my amazing daughter because I have bias and just her amazingness at this particular day.
Hello, my name is Eden Neville. I'm here today not just as a sibling, but as someone who lost a part of herself when my brother Alex died from a counterfeit pill he got off Snapchat. Losing Alex was like losing a mirror. So much of who I am, my interests, my sense of humor, even my dreams were shaped by wanting to be like him. When he died, I didn't just lose a brother, I lost a piece of my identity. I became lonely, I struggled to form bonds, afraid of getting close to anyone else I might lose. I felt unmotivated, disconnected, and unsure of who I was without him. I often wonder what Alex would think of me now. He'd probably call me a dork, but I think he'd be proud that I'm standing here speaking out. I've learned a lot in the years since his death. I've seen just how social media platforms can be used to exploit young people. When I was just 14, I got an ad on Instagram for push-up bras and diet pills. The algorithm knew I was a teenage girl, and it used that knowledge to target the insecurities of my demographic. Why should any 14-year-old be worried about their size and their shape? This same technology of this algorithm is being used to sell deadly pills to kids like my brother. I am deeply inspired by the strength of parents like my mom and Kirsten, and by youth advocates like Katie and Kella. However, I am painfully uninspired by the inaction of tech companies and Congress. We don't need more thoughts and prayers. We need accountability. We need regulation. We need platforms to start prioritizing profit over people. Alex should be here, and I shouldn't have to be. Thank you.
Of course, I'm incredibly proud of her. I did not know what she was going to say that day. I did not see her speech, she didn't practice it in front of me or anything. So she's the best. And she's about to graduate high school and I'll probably die. Okay. See, I'm dramatic. This is that QR code will take you to this film. It might have a charge in there for $5, but you can change the price to $0 and watch the film for free. I'm not going to play the trailer for you. The trailer's really dramatic, which kind of scares people off from the film, but to tell you the film is very educational. It's very balanced and it's very educational. I highly recommend. It's an hour and 15 minutes if you can spare the time to go ahead and watch that. These are the citations. If you need those, you want to take a picture of that screen that are throughout my presentation. And then now this next part's new to me. I have to give you your, I'm going to call it a quiz. I can't remember what the survey. So, which social media design feature is associated with compulsive use and increased mental health risk among adolescents? Ta-da, are we done? We got it? You ready for the answer? Ta-da! Oops, gotta go here and do this. So all of the above, right? So no one got it wrong. Good job, guys. All right, so the next one is according to federal law enforcement data, federal law enforcement data, which population is most frequently victimized in cases of online financial sextortion involving minors? All right, and the answer is, oops, there we go. Alice and boys ages 13 to 17. Good job, 132 of you. Next one. Which approach is most effective for health when supporting adolescents affected by online exploitation or digital harm? All right. Okay, here we go. Ta-da! Establishing a supportive, non-punitive environment. Very good. And I know some of us that like hard and fast rules. That's a hard one for us to mold ourselves to. Okay. Oh, I guess that was the last one. So that is my contact information. Uh, again, I talk about this and it's I live for it. My daughter's number one. This is work is number two because as far as I'm concerned, this is how I still get to care for Alex. I don't know how to describe. It's a weird life. Let me just tell you that. Um, so reach out to me if you have questions. If you have a question that you don't want to ask here, a lot of times people have personal questions for their own, maybe something that pertains to themselves. I'm happy to answer that any way that I can for you.
Okay, at this time, we'll move to our second topic to cover today, and that is the 2026 Massachusetts Pharmacy Regulatory Update. We will be welcoming Michelle Chan and Julienne Tran. Michelle Chan has extensive previous experience in hematology, oncology, and pediatrics with more than 2 decades at the Massachusetts General Hospital. Since 2015, she has served as a quality assurance pharmacist for the Massachusetts Board of Registration in Pharmacy, where they develop regulations, educational programs, and compliance guidance while supporting statewide licensure and practice standards. Julienne Tran has previous experience in retail pharmacy as staff and as a clinical program specialist. She has served as a pharmacy investigator for the Massachusetts Department of Public Health since 2016, where they conduct statewide inspections, investigate complaints, and support policy development to ensure safe practices. They will present on the 2026 pharmacy regulatory updates to include an overview on regulations, policies, licensure and professional standards, and reporting requirements. Again, we'll have an opportunity for questions at the end of the presentation through the chat function. So please welcome Michelle and Julienne. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having us. Give me a minute to share my slides and we'll get started. Okay, maybe more than just 1 minute. Again, I'm Michelle Chan, and Julienne and I are going to talk about a regulatory update today. As you've heard earlier, we have nothing to disclose, and our objectives today are threefold. We're going to talk about major differences and major changes set forth in the new and updated regulations. We're going to review new and updated advisories, policies, and circular letters, as well as hopefully you'll be able to recognize common inspectional deficiencies at the end of the program. So before we get started, I'd just like to talk about the difference between board staff and board members. Board staff, like Julienne and I, are full-time employees of the state, and everything we do on behalf of the board. So they have given us authority to, do some licensing for them, practice compliance, investigations, inspections, educational programs, and several other things on their behalf. Then we have board members who are appointed by the governor. So they're unpaid volunteers who review basically everything that we collect for them and review them at a monthly board meeting. So they'll decide on investigations, they'll decide on the case and the disposition, they'll review any of the practice documents that we've developed and give us their input and approval. So just to be clear about the jurisdiction, in a hospital, the board only has jurisdiction over individual licensees and the practice of sterile compounding and the sterile compounding facility itself. So essentially that's it. So the people in the sterile compounding practice. So the pharmacy board makeup is determined by state law. So there are 13 members of the board, and pharmacists make up the.
Hi, Michelle. I just wanted to let you know we can't see your slides.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, that's all right.
Hold on a second. Let me try that again. Is that better?
Yes.
Okay, great. Sorry about that. Technology is not my forte. Okay, so we were talking about the pharmacy board makeup. So the board is made up of 13 members, and that is determined by state law. So the bulk of the board is our pharmacists. There are 8 pharmacists, including 2 chain, 2 independent, 1 long-term care, 1 sterile compounding, 1 academic, 1 hospital. And all those pharmacists have to have at least 7 years of experience in the seat that they're holding, and they have to be currently engaged in practice in Massachusetts. Because this is determined by state law, we're also lucky enough to have a pharmacy technician. Not very many states have a pharmacy technician, so we are lucky in that respect to get their input on documents that come before the board. As we know, we can't get through the day really without a pharmacy technicians. We also have 2 healthcare professionals. We have a nurse and a physician and 2 members of the public who have experience in healthcare delivery. The terms are for 3 years, and board members can serve 2 consecutive terms. They can take a break and come back on the board after those 2 consecutive terms, as long as they have that 3-year break in between. So the standards of Pharmacy Patient Care Initiative, which we also call SPICY, that started during 2021, during the height of the pandemic, and we were having a lot of issues with patients not getting their meds, because not only were patients getting sick with COVID, but also, pharmacy staff and employees were getting ill as well. So we decided to have a dialogue with corporate pharmacy as well as professional organizations to see what we could do to help pharmacies during this tough time, and to see if there was anything that we needed to know about from their perspective as well. So we did find that there were several ways that we could help. So we were able to reduce the amount of less frequent perpetual counts. We were allowed to increase the staffing ratios for pharmacies that were giving vaccines. When an inspector went into a store and he found essentially a hot mess, he was able to know who to contact at corporate to get that store some help so that they could get some relief. So we were also able to license technician trainees a little bit more quickly back then as well. So we have several documents that I'm going to talk about today. There's regulations, legislation, policies, advisory, circular letters, and it can be kind of confusing. I'm going to go through them and explain them, and more importantly, how it affects your practice and how you should use them in your practice. So first of all, legislation versus regulations. So legislation is basically a statute or a law, and in our case, it's MGL or Massachusetts general laws. And then those are laws that are put into effect by the legislature. So the board really doesn't have any input to that. And those laws tend not to have a whole lot of detail. They tend to provide just the general framework as to what the requirement is supposed to be. And that's where the regulations come in. The regulations are written by the board and they're authorized by the statute in order to put the law into effect. So it needs those details in order to make things doable and to put into effect. So the big difference between legislation and regulation is that regulation could be waived. It's potential that it could be waived. If you have a good reason, or if there's some particular scenario that you have that just doesn't fit in with the regulations, the board can consider waiving that regulation for you, unless, of course, it's based in legislation, and then in that case, they would not be able to. So late last year, actually about a little over a year ago, several regulations were updated, and one new regulation came out as well. So we had updated regulations at 6, 9, 15, and 20. 6 was about licensure, 9 is about professional practice, and 15 is continuous quality improvement. And out of that, also, we have a new section called reporting. So basically what we tried to do was pull as many of the reporting requirements out of those individual sections and create one new section. So you kind of have one-stop shopping for what needs to be reported and when it needs to be reported. So section 6 talks about new license types. There's also some ancient stuff that came out of those regulations that are no longer there, such as the certificates of fitness that allowed pharmacies to dispense alcohol, and some of the reporting requirements were in here. So that all got pulled out of there. But there are several new licensing categories. It used to be just a drugstore pharmacy or a retail pharmacy. But now we have additional licenses for sterile compounding pharmacies, complex non-sterile, and institutional sterile compounding pharmacies. And as well as non-residents also have similar requirements that were incorporated into this regulation as well. Section 9 is probably where you would live the most. It's mostly professional practice standards. So this is just a sampling of the new requirements that were added into Section 9. So now that every prescription requires an offer of counseling, except when it's a new drug therapy. In that case, counseling must be provided. So if someone has been on, say, a Atenolol for 10 years and they bring you a new prescription, that's not considered new drug therapy. So it's basically, a new antibiotic or something like that where counseling is required. Pharmacies are now, required to transfer prescriptions to another pharmacy in a timely manner. The language in the old regulation was a bit soft, and we were having difficulty with some pharmacies transferring these things in a timely manner to ensure patient continuity of care. Pharmacies can only take meds back if they were dispensed in error or if they were defective, and we just put that in here to make that clear. Schedule 5 prescriptions are now the same as Schedules 3 and 4, so they're only valid for 6 months or 5 refills. So now 3, 4s, and 5s can all be treated the same way with the 5 refills and 6-month expiration. Schedule 6 prescription used to be under urban legend, only valid for 1 year. Well, now it's official. It's now officially valid for 1 year, now that it's been incorporated into this regulation. There's a new requirement for managers of record to work in a pharmacy for at least 30 hours a week. And that's so that the manager of record knows what's going on in that pharmacy from day to day. And you can't really you can't really figure that out when you're not there enough. So that was that requirement. The requirement for licensees not being able to work more than 12 hours in a 24-hour period. That language was changed where it used to say more than 12 hours in a day. So this makes it more clear that you can't work more than 12 hours in a 24-hour period without a break. And this applies to all licensees, not just pharmacists. It's pharmacy techs and interns and trainees and everyone. So you might be asking, well, what about gabapentin? Where does gabapentin fall in all of this? Gabapentin is still a Schedule 6 drug. It is an additional drug under the DPH, which means basically it has to be, dispenses have to be submitted to the PMP. So you still treat it as a Schedule 6 drug. The prescriptions are still good for a year, and all of that Schedule 6 stuff still applies. This new section in Section 20 has a lot of reporting requirements. So for instance, we have serious adverse drug events. So any dispensing error that results in an injury or a death has to be reported, as well as one that results from a compound medication. So if it was a compound, whether it was correct or not, that still has to be reported. That came out of, the 2012 compounding crisis. Managers of record and designated pharmacists in charge. So the manager of record is a term we use here in Massachusetts. So that's the pharmacist who's responsible for a pharmacy under mass regulations, under board's regulations. A designated pharmacist in charge is a Massachusetts licensed pharmacist who's responsible for a non-resident pharmacy. So that non-resident pharmacist, that pharmacist does not necessarily have to be in charge of that non-resident pharmacy. They just need to be, explaining the law to the pharmacy, make sure they stay within the parameters of mass law. One quick thing to note is that mass located pharmacies, if you're a manager of record and you leave that position, you do need to notify us when you leave. And that's mostly for your protection. So we know when you've left that position, you're no longer responsible for that pharmacy, and we know to reach out to the pharmacy if they haven't already submitted a change of manager to find out who the new person in charge is. Individual licensees, you can update any of your demographic information by just logging into the portal where you normally do your renewal. You can change your address, phone number, any of that information. But there is no requirement to report employment changes. So the only change that you must be reported is when you leave the manager of record position. So just so that you're aware of that. All pharmacies have a duty to report certain things such as disciplinary actions or loss of accreditation or anything of that nature. If you're inspected by another state or a federal agency, especially if you get a warning letter, then you are responsible to notify the board of that. In Massachusetts, you're also required to notify us if any controlled substances have been lost or stolen. Compounding pharmacies also have a duty to report a list and volume of the dispensed medications, dispensed compounds in the previous year. That is collected on the renewal application, so there's no need to search for an extra form for that. And again, defective compounds need to be disclosed. And in a sterile compounding pharmacy, any action level in the environment needs to be disclosed as well, anything under USP 797. So two things, we are collecting this information, first of all, because the statute requires us to, but also because, we're just trying to make sure that, we keep the public safe and try to prevent any massive or extensive errors or anything that could be dangerous to the public health. We do believe in just culture. We are not here to penalize people, but we do need to collect that information to maintain public safety. One other thing to note about the reports is that when you go to our reporting page, the top document there is a reporting requirement overview. So we try to kind of make a spreadsheet of the most common reports and not only list what the requirement is, but tell you, how long you have to report it, as well as how to report it, whether it's through the portal or whether it's a form or some other way, shape, or form. Okay, I'm just going to talk a little bit about prescription basics because prescribing and filling requirements can differ a little bit. So I'll tell you what I mean. So these are the prescribing requirements. This is what a prescriber is supposed to do with their prescriptions. They are supposed to have all this information on their prescriptions before they send it to a pharmacy. And just to make just to call out a few things here, the MCSR number is the Mass Controlled Substance Registration number, and every prescriber in the state has to have that number. Many also have a DEA if they're also prescribing federally controlled substances, but every single one has to have the Mass Controlled Substance Registration. So people like optometrists are not going to have a DEA number because they're not permitted to prescribe for federally controlled substances, but they have to have that MCSR number. So again, these are the prescriber requirements. Now we get into the prescription requirements and what do you need to fill. So again, on the left, you see the needed to fill. This is everything you need to fill a prescription. And I just like to call out the signature. So if you get a piece of paper that just has a type name on there, that is not an electronic signature. An electronic signature is only valid when it's transferred from the electronic prescriber system to an electronic pharmacy system. If it comes across on a piece of paper, that is not a valid prescription. But pretty much anything that's here that is not on the prescription mostly can be added by contacting the prescriber or that you can do through, you'll find that in one of the other policies and what you can change and what you can't. So what do you not need to fill a prescription? So there's a lot of mid-level prescribers. A lot of nurse practitioners can practice independently. They do not even have a supervisor to put on their prescription. So it's their responsibility to put that supervisor on the prescription if they indeed do have one. You don't need to hunt it down. You don't even need to know whether they have a supervisor or not. It's their responsibility, not yours. An NPI number. An NPI number is for prescribers who prescribe for humans. So a veterinarian is not going to have an NPI number. So calling them and asking them for their NPI number is not going to get you anywhere because they don't have one. And then just regarding electronic prescriptions, again, so it's the prescriber's job to make sure that if they have to file an electronic prescription, that they do. But there are several exceptions to that. As a result of the snowstorm last week, there was one prescribing group that lost their ability to electronic prescribe, so they were issuing paper prescriptions. And a pharmacy can always accept that. Under this regulation, actually says in there that a pharmacy can always accept a prescription that's not electronically prescription. Of course, if it's, in your judgment that it's proper. Advisories. So advisories are considered to be best practice or advice on how to meet a requirement. So the terms you're going to see here are should. You're not going to see generally must or shall unless we're talking about advice on how to meet that must or shall requirement. So a shall means, that you have to do it, and should means it's a recommendation. So the first advisory we have is for managers of record. So as we all know, managers of record have, huge responsibilities, several more responsibilities than other staff pharmacists. They have to make sure that all the licenses stay up to date, and that's especially a challenge with pharmacy technicians and pharmacy technician trainees and interns whose licenses expire pretty much at any point during the year. They're responsible to make sure that ratios are always followed throughout the day. So you need to account for those ratios during lunch or whatever, and making sure that you're not over ratio. Inspections, it's prudent for a manager of record to have a regulatory box or a binder where you keep all the inspectional information that you're going to need there. So any of the lists of employees and any documents that you've received over the past year or so. Perpetual inventories and stuff like that for the board, for the investigator to review when they come in to inspect your pharmacy. Having a spot like that makes it easier for the investigator, helps them do their job more quickly and more efficiently, and gets them out of your pharmacy much more quickly. So there are a lot of other things in here as well, and you can review that on your own. There are a lot of citations in here as well to help you figure out where a certain requirement may have come from. So the next advisory is USP 800 in community pharmacy. So USP 800 is the hazardous drugs section of USP. So USP 800 is not a compounding chapter. It applies to every healthcare setting, including retail pharmacies. So when an investigator comes in and they're looking to see what is going on and what you've done regarding your hazardous drug program, whether you've taken the time to identify your hazardous drugs and assess the risk, they're just looking for a well thought out and documented program. Like you've taken in consideration that, you're going to use just gloves when you're counting out hazardous drugs, but you're going to use gloves and a mask if you're counting out anti-neoplastics. Something like that is what they're going to be looking for when they inspect your pharmacy. For those sterile compounders in the audience, we do have several sterile compounding advisories, smoke studies so that it could help evaluate airflow, action level environmental monitoring results, and remediation considerations to help you decide what to do when you have an above action level, and also to help you figure out what happened and how that action level happened. So, things to think about. Failed HEPA filters on whether you should recall and how you can continue to move forward in view of a failed HEPA filter. HVAC excursions. In this particular document, we recommend having alert and action levels. And an alert level means, something is trending towards the wrong way and you haven't quite reached that alert level where you need to actually do a recall or stop compounding. So you have that alert level so that you know when you're trending in the wrong way. And the one on media fills just gives advice on how to technically do a media fill, how long to incubate it, how many need to be done, and that sort of thing. The next group of documents are called policies, and policies are considered sub-regulatory guidance. And all that means is that the regulation needed a little bit more explanation, so we have a policy that gives that explanation. So you're going to see terms in here that say shall or must, and you're required to follow these particular policies. So the first one is, this came about in 2024. They finally changed the statute, allowing you to fill 90 days supply of certain Schedule 2 and 3 medications. So buprenorphine and anything for opioid use disorder, you can now fill for 90-day supply. Any non-opioids, such as stimulants and testosterone, and implantable infusion pumps. So all of these you can fill for a 90-day supply. You don't need to worry about what the diagnosis is. You don't have to track down whether it's ADD, ADHD, narcolepsy, or anything like that. You can simply go buy the drug on how much you can fill. So anything that falls outside of these three groups is probably an opioid, and you can only fill those for a 30-day supply. The next policy is about defective drug preparations. So this is a policy for all pharmacies and all defective drugs. So even something that a typical retail pharmacy did, if it was like a miracle mouthwash that was compounded improperly or whatever, this is for everyone, for all defective drugs. So you need to, if it's recalled or dispensed in any way, shape, or form, it has to be reported to the board, and then you have to keep a log and maintain it for 10 years. If it didn't leave the pharmacy, there's no need to report it to us, but you do need to document it in your CQI program to make sure that nothing, that you can hopefully avoid it in the future. And again, these are not punitive documents. They are merely, documents for us to help follow up and make sure that we ensure public safety. So there's no need to be worried. We believe in just culture as well. The next policy is about naloxone dispensing. So anybody can come into your pharmacy and ask to purchase naloxone under the statewide standing order. The statewide standing order has OTC and prescription products. Anybody can buy it with their own insurance, even though they may or may not be using it for themselves, a family member. They can come in and get it and use it for anyone they want. That's why we suggest that you label it with naloxone rescue kit rather than putting the person's name and address on the label. We have heard from Mass Health that they will pay for more than one kit per month, but you have to put the kit in as a 1-day supply, not a 30-day supply. So bear that in mind if someone's looking for more than one kit. Something new that popped up over the summer, a new piece of legislation now requires pharmacies to offer to dispense naloxone with every Schedule 2 opioid that you dispense. So bear that in mind when you're on the bench. Policy 2023-07 is in regards to non-sterile compounding, and it's regarding all non-sterile compounding, not just complex. As you're probably aware, all pharmacists are required to follow all current chapters of USP. So when USP 795 came out a few years ago, it seemed to have been written for pharmacies who compounding was a core business. So they have a lot of extensive cleaning, sanitizing requirements, and temperature monitoring. If you're a typical retail pharmacy that only does occasional compounding, then the board is not going to enforce that as long as the pharmacy is otherwise clean and sanitary. Carpeting is not recommended by USP, but again, if you're a typical retail pharmacy that's just doing an occasional compound, then the board then that will be okay by the board. But if your core business is non-sterile compounding, we would expect not to see carpeting in that area. USP also considers those pre-measured compounding kits and adding flavoring to be considered compounding with all of the paperwork that comes with it. So in this particular document, we go over some documentation requirements on how to do that documentation more simply so that we can, get the documentation that needs to be done. We can get that done as well as supply patients with the compounds that they need. When a patient requests flavoring, you may add that to the prescription without contacting the prescriber, and it has to be added to the patient label. And again, all of the other documentation needs to be done as well. So don't just simply stick it in there and not document it. I guess that's the only point I'm trying to make. Vaccine administration. So, as you may have remembered this past fall, we had some issues with the CDC and the recommended vaccines for patients. So the DPH commissioner has put out guidance on what the routine vaccines should be, and they can be, the document is linked through this policy, so you can view that at any time. So that even includes COVID-19, and pharmacy personnel can vaccinate to patients 5 years and older. Just something to clear up about technicians. So technicians are only allowed to prepare and administer the vaccines and any emergency medications. So the prescription still needs to be done by the pharmacist. The drug needs to be checked by the pharmacist, and then it can go to the technician for just administration, just so that we're clear on that. Technicians also have to have, immunizing technicians have to have 2 hours of updated training or education every 2 years. It doesn't need to be formal ACPE training, but just some degree of training every 2 years. And as a reminder, trainees may never administer vaccines. Regardless of their past, they are not permitted to administer vaccines. The continuing education policy, this is renewal year, so just want to bring this forward. I want to remind you that the continuing education requirement is 20 hours every year. It is not 40 every 2 years. So you can't do all 40 this year and have it count for this year and last year. It's 20 every single year, and that's the way it's written in the law. So we have the typical 5 live and the 2 hours of law and the maximum of 8 hours a day, but this policy also goes over like specific duties requiring credit hours. So if you're a sterile compounding pharmacist, or if you're a pharmacist who does non-sterile compounding and you need to know, do I have to do CEs for that? This policy will tell you what you need to do, or if you need to do non-sterile compounding CE. So, if you're actually doing the non-sterile compounding, or you're checking a non-sterile compound, or you're supervising someone. So this policy will give you some guidance if you're not quite sure if you need any of those requirements. Also be aware of the ACPE compounding code. It is not specific for sterile or complex non-sterile compounding. So what we'll be looking for, because we have that sterile and non-sterile requirement, we'll be looking for the program titles to include terms like, sterile or non-sterile or 795 or 797 to try to figure out which bucket it would fall into. If you come across a program and you think, oh, wow, this program looks great and it looks like it should count, but it doesn't have a keyword in it, you can feel free to email us and we can weigh in on it for you. Be aware that the board does have the authority to audit and fine you up to $1,000 for not completing your CEs every calendar year. And another thing that we've seen is the CPE monitor that is issued by NABP. After you complete a program, double check your CPE monitor to make sure those credits landed onto your profile, because that's what we look at when we're trying to evaluate CE compliance. So please do that. We have several people at the end of every year who say, oh my God, it never made it to my CPE monitor. What do I do? And there isn't much that we can do. All right. So the next policy is scope of practice. And this goes over the scope of practice for technicians, trainees, certified techs, pharmacists, and interns. It's not intended to be an exhaustive list of everything that people can do, but we try to capture as much as we can. And it's intended to be a living document so that we can update it as time moves on and as practice changes. So, there's also several links in here to other policies, like, for instance, pharmacists and interns can administer certain injections. It will give you the links for, well, you can administer vaccines. Here's the link for that policy. You can administer drugs for substance use disorder or mental health drugs. Here's a link for that. But you should also be aware that if it's not here, it's probably either hasn't been addressed or it's not permitted. So, pharmacists are not allowed to administer any other Schedule 6 drugs other than what's here. So pharmacists can't do penicillin skin tests. We've had that question a number of times. That's not something that's authorized by state law. So the next group of documents are called circular letters. So the board has a sister agency called the Drug Control Program. And the Drug Control Program is in charge of basically prescribing and prescribing requirements. And they have something called a circular letter, which is basically similar to the board's policy. So it's considered sub-regulatory guidance and it's an enforceable document. So the first one is in regard to the access law. So the access law allows access to birth control and emergency contraception. So as far as birth control goes, a patient can get a 12-month supply of birth control at once. So it's not all insurers, but for the most part, patients should be able to access a 12-month supply if they want, all at once. So if they come to you and say, I want a 12-month supply and the prescription is, 12 months or 3 months with 3 refills or something, just run it through the insurance. If insurance covers it, then you're good to go. And you can certainly dispense that 12-month supply. Emergency contraception is permitted by pharmacists, but it's not required. There is a statewide standing order under which you can dispense emergency contraception when a patient requests it. So the order includes any of the FDA-approved pills. It includes antiemetics should the patient want one, and also requires a yearly reporting requirement. And again, it's not required, but the pharmacists are able to dispense off that standing order. Contraceptive prescribing, also, this is not a requirement for pharmacists. It is something you may do if you would like to. Any pharmacist can prescribe contraceptive pills or patches, OTC, prescription, anybody of any age you can dispense it to. This is the one case where you do not need to have an MCSR. This was in order to be able to increase access to contraceptive for anybody who needs it. So you don't need the MCSR for that, but you do need an NPI because I assume you'll probably want to bill it. In order to participate in contraceptive prescribing, you would need to complete a training program, and the patient would have to be offered a self-screening tool. And in this particular document, there's a link to a really good self-screening tool that Maryland put out a few years ago. Just as a reminder about electronic prescribing, I know I mentioned this earlier, but it still pops up. If you have a valid written or oral prescription and not an e-prescription, you can absolutely dispense it. You do not need to require an electronic prescription. That includes gabapentin, federally controlled drugs, anything. As long as it's an otherwise valid prescription, please fill it. Don't cause a delay in therapy just for the fact that they haven't issued an electronic prescription. The Drug Control Program Director is David Johnson. So if you have any questions about any of these circular letters, you can certainly reach out to them. In general, both the Drug Control Program and the Board of Pharmacy have at the bottom of each document who to reach out to if there's questions on that particular circular letter or policy. Here's just a little smattering of other interesting things that pop up that don't really fall into any of our little categories. First of all is the opioid pain medication fact sheet. So over 10 years ago, this first came out when, it was required to be dispensed when you were dispensing Schedule 2 and 3 opioids. Early last summer, there was an update to the law that requires several new additions for patients to be aware of when in this document. So the non-opioid alternatives, such as yoga or NSAIDs, that all needed to be added into the document so that patients are aware of that, making them aware that they can get smaller quantities, any risk reduction strategies. There were several things that needed to be added to this fact sheet. Unfortunately, that made the fact sheet very long. It is now 2 pages, double-sided. But it was developed by DPH, so please don't change the format because it was formatted for best readability. You can provide it electronically, though, so you don't necessarily have to print it out for everyone if they're amenable to receiving it electronically. Due to some feedback that we got in a previous lecture, someone had asked if we can translate it into other languages, and we have asked about that, and they are in the process of translating it into 4 other languages. IDs for dispensing schedules 2 through 5, as well as gabapentin. You need a government-issued photo ID that's valid and in date in order to dispense these drugs, but be aware there are several patients out there who do not even have an ID. They don't have photo ID, especially any of the acceptable ones that are listed there on the right. So you can dispense a drug without ID. You just need to make sure you document the reason and then the customer indicates their name on the electronic prescription or paper prescription. So if you'll see that little link at the bottom there, it's the PMP data submission dispenser guide that lists all those acceptable forms of ID. I know they are in the process of updating it and adding a few other forms of ID to make it to add to the list. It also gives hints on how to submit the data to PMP as well. So again, PMP is the Drug Control Program, not the Board of Pharmacy. So moving forward, I'm going to turn it over to Julienne, and she's going to talk about the inspection and investigation side of the board.
So before we take a look at some of the pictures that the investigators have seen on the road, I just want to echo some of the things that Michelle had highlighted in her presentation. So starting in 2025, as you all may know, our self-inspection tool is not a state secret. It is available on the Massachusetts Board of Pharmacy's website. Consider it an open book exam. This could be a time for you to print it out, have one of your pharmacy interns or APPE students use it as a tool to go through your pharmacy and make sure that you are in compliance with all of the Board of Pharmacy's regulatory requirements. Self-inspections are now required as part of an inspection when the investigator goes in. So it's important that you complete a self-inspection and have it readily available for the inspectors when they go into the pharmacy, because that's one of the things that they will be looking for. Another thing to mention is the change of MOR, the manager of record. As Michelle has mentioned, when you leave your place of employment, it is important to first email the Board of Pharmacy to let them know that you have left that pharmacy, so that you are not responsible for anything that happens the day that you leave. A change of manager of record application is required within 14 calendar days of you leaving your current employment. Also, surprisingly, we have seen an increase in inspection where we see ratio deficiencies, where there are more than 1-to-4 ratios in which there is one pharmacist, but there isn't either an intern or a certified technician that is on site. We have seen 1 pharmacist to 5 pharmacy technician, or even a combination with trainees. So please be sure that when the manager of records are working on your schedule for your staff, that you are ensuring that there is compliance of staffing ratio. Additionally, expired C2s. If you have expired Schedule 2 medications that are going to be returned in the next return cycle, please make sure that that stays on your perpetual inventory and that you count it every 10 days until it leaves your pharmacy. That has been an increase this past year that the manager of records are forgetting to complete. So with that, we'll take at some of the pictures that we have seen on the road. Michelle, if you can advance the slides. So in this picture is a picture of one of the inspectors that had swiped their glove, and that is a line of dirt there. And this was found in a complex non-sterile compounding room. You want to make sure that you have a cleaning procedure in place, a daily, weekly, and monthly cleaning schedule. So this pharmacy needed to review their cleaning schedule. The next slide, Michelle, please. So this is a picture in a retail pharmacy of a contaminated graduated cylinder. The technical term for all that pink and brown stuff is goobly goop. That needs to be cleaned each and after every reconstitution or after each compounding of medication. The next picture is not a picture depicting our snowstorm last week, but these are actual dorm fridges that were in the pharmacy that had ice build up. And on the left side, you can see that there is medication vial of a vaccine that is in that freezer. So it's very important that you also have a schedule to defrost your freezers every 3 months or 6 months so that it doesn't build up to the state. Next picture. The next picture is I applaud the pharmacists, you know, being a multitasker, but this was a picture of the medication freezer. In medication freezer, the inspector found marinated raw meat in the freezer. So please, medication freezers and refrigerator can only contain scheduled medications in the pharmacy, and no food, raw meat, or ice cream, please. The next slide is a copy or a picture of a refrigerator. In the brown box is Moderna vaccine that was in there. So, and this was also in the front store freezer. So, medication in the pharmacy needs to be within the pharmacy proper, and it cannot be moved outside of the pharmacy proper into the front store. This is a lovely picture of insanitary conditions behind a computer. We know that there's dust and dirt and all kind of good stuff that build behind the computer. So you just want to make sure that there is proper cleaning in place. This, my son and I were having a controversial debate on this. I think this is a centipede. Correct me if I'm wrong, but this was in the sterile hazardous compounding buffer room. There should be no bugs of any kind in the buffer room. So again, this goes back to having a proper daily, weekly, and monthly cleaning schedules in your buffer room. So in addition to centipedes, spiders are not allowed in your buffer room as well. As you can see, there is a spider in the buffer room, and additionally, you can see that the entry door to the buffer room is not hands-free. So how are you entering the buffer room without touching the handle? Next slide, please. This is a picture of a duct-taped canopy style exhaust in the buffer room. This is pretty ingenious and creative, but this is not what you can do when you have a buffer room. Any renovations or changes that you make to a buffer room needs to be, you need to notify the board prior to a renovation. Again, this is also another picture of insanitary conditions that the shelves needed to be cleaned. And the next picture, you could see that this is a compounding area, and there's also Windex. So please keeping all your compounding equipment and your products together, and we just don't want to make sure that there's no cleaning supplies there, just in case, you know, somebody inadvertently picks up that cleaning supply instead of the Aura Suite or the alcohol. And just to make sure that you know, we understand some of the highlights to the presentation. So the first assessment question is, which of the following reflects a new requirement in the regulation that was approved on 12/6/24? There are 4 choices below, A, B, C, and D. And if you wanted to select an answer, please. Okay, so it looks like everybody chose B, and the correct answer is, it is B, which is a Schedule 5 prescriptions only valid for 6 months, which is the same as Schedules 3 and 4. Reporting a change in deployment is not a requirement in the state. Also, counseling is now required for all new drug therapies. So the offer to counsel is required now for refills and ongoing therapy. And again, no pharmacy licensee is permitted to work more than 12 hours in a 24-hour period without a 8-hour break. Okay, so next slide, please. And the next assessment question is, which of the following statements regarding vaccinations is true? There are 3 options, A, B, and C. And just to move it along, since we are getting towards the end of the presentation, this is, everybody chose a C. And that is correct. Pharmacy technicians training may never vaccinate. COVID vaccines are now administered with a DPH commissioner that allows the administration over 5 years to be vaccinated in the pharmacy. And pharmacy technicians that vaccinate need only 2 hours of CE education every 2 years. So the next question. Which of the following would be considered an inspectional deficiency? Michelle, we'll just move it along just because I think we're over our time now. It is B, and that is correct. All prescriptions must be stored in the pharmacy license space. Omeprazole cannot be routinely compounded, as there is a copy of a commercially available drug. And flavoring can be added without a prescriber authorization, but it must be documented on the label and the prescription. Next slide is a prescription. I know it's your day off, but hopefully you can review this prescription quickly and see what is missing. And this is a paper prescription that you received today. So we'll move it to the next slide, Michelle. So some of the highlights of this paper prescription is that you could see that it can't be filled in the state of Massachusetts since the prescriber is in North Carolina. In Massachusetts, C2 opioids can only be filled from contiguous states and Maine. If this was a non-narcotic C2, it could be filled. Some of the other issues is that it is over 5 days old, and we would only be able to accept a Schedule II prescriptions within 5 days of issued. C2 prescriptions, as you are all aware, there are no refills, and a 7-day limit is for a prescriber, not for the pharmacist, so they can write more, but they needed to document it in the patient's record. And you can fill the full quantity if you are comfortable with it, and a partial fill language is only needed for C2 narcotics, so you can add it if it is missing. And there also must be a offer to counsel naloxone for C2 drugs when dispensing. So we had the PSUD program now, which is converted into a standardized unified recovery and monitoring program called URAMP, and it is a confidential voluntary alternative to discipline for those licensees who have a mental or substance use disorder. And there are additional information on the link below. And the Board of Pharmacy websites has a plethora of information, has contact information, advisories and policy that Michelle had mentioned, current and draft regulations, and news and updates, including public hearing dates when the regulations are open for public comment. So again, visit our pharmacy website for all the information, including our self-inspection tool for retail pharmacies 795 and 797 compounding pharmacies. The NABP newsletter, the Board of Pharmacy provides highlights to some of the updates from Massachusetts Board of Pharmacy updates, and our author is no other than Michelle Tran here. So she provides wonderful highlights to some of the policies and advisories and regulations that come out that are very short and sweet. It's kind of reminiscent of the pharmacist letter. So check that out and add yourself to the Board of Pharmacy distribution list to receive a copy. And again, this is our contact info. If we don't have an opportunity to answer all the questions that are in the chat box, please send it to the pharmacy.admin@mass.gov, and we will provide an answer to your questions. And again, these are all of the references that are listed that are available on the Board of Pharmacy website.
Thank you, Mark. We can hear you. I'll go ahead and introduce you, give you a few moments to reset. So thank you, everybody, for waiting and for your patience with the delay as we work through that issue. Our next session is titled The State's Aggressive Approaches to Expanding Pharmacist Prescriptive Authority, which is led by Dr. Mark Boesen. Dr. Boesen is a nationally recognized leader in health law, pharmacy operations, regulatory compliance, and healthcare policy with a career spanning executive leadership, legal practice, and clinical pharmacy. He's a licensed attorney and founding partner with Boesen and Snow Law, as well as the principal and owner of Health Policy Associates, which is a healthcare consulting firm specialized in pharmacy regulatory affairs and healthcare system design. His presentation today will focus on expanding pharmacist prescriptive authority across different states, including those associated requirements. Thank you, Dr. Boesen. We're glad to have you.
It's my pleasure to be here. And again, I apologize to folks. The IT support people for this program are fantastic. And they said, hey, just restart your computer, which is something I should have thought of a half hour ago. But I appreciate the indulgence. I promise you it'll be worth your while. I appreciate the generous introduction. And let's jump right into it. I'm going to share my screen. All right. So what we're going to talk about this morning is the state's aggressive approaches to expanding pharmacists' prescriptive authority, particularly in a post-COVID area. I view this as maybe the only thing that came out of COVID that was a positive. Perhaps there are some others, but this is my favorite. Let me just confirm with event staff that you can see my slide. It should be a title slide.
I can see your slide. Thank you.
Wonderful. All right. Again, my name is Mark Boesen. One of the things I'm very proud of are my fellowships, and I suspect many of you who are participating are as well. One of the things that I'm especially proud of is the FACLM. That's the fellowship of the American College of Legal Medicine. As far as I know, I'm the only pharmacist that's been admitted to that. Those are mostly MDs and JDs. And one of the things I've spent my career doing is trying to encourage others in the pharmacy profession, in other health disciplines, physicians, nurses, pharmacy technicians, you name anybody who's got a license to practice, talk to other people, not just your own group all the time. And I'm happy that this is an interdisciplinary group, and I'm happy to be here. And I'm happy that the physicians have adopted me as one of their own, and very proud of that. The other fellowship I'm also very proud of is the Arizona Pharmacy Association. I've been a pharmacist for 30 years. I'm a second-generation pharmacist. I'm a second-generation independent pharmacy owner. We're at a crossroads in the United States when it comes to, our pharmacy is going to survive. It breaks my heart that Walgreens recently went private for pennies on the dollar. I'm worried about the entity that bought them and what their long-term plan is for Walgreens. I'm a Chicagoan by birth, the home place of Walgreens. It is an icon of Americana, and one of the reasons why I like to do this presentation is to talk about, well, the only way for pharmacies to survive is to continue to provide the types of services, candidly, we've always been providing, but for free. And then leveraging new technologies in a way that's not offensive to prescribers and physicians and nurse practitioners and PAs, and also helps the community and gets pharmacy out of, at least community pharmacy, out of the distribution of commodities. What are the learning objectives today? They are part of the packet. They are on this slide here. What I want to talk about is some legislative trends and variations in state models. And I'm going to analyze a very specific case example. COVID brought us a couple of things. One of the things it's brought us is the ability to perform healthcare services remotely, and also within the community pharmacy. Before COVID, I think there was some stigma. In fact, I know there was some stigma against telemedicine. It can't be as good as face-to-face medicine. It can't be real. It's suspicious. We got to make sure we're doing it right. And there's also some suspicion as to whether or not community pharmacists can perform services other than taking the pills from the big bottle and putting them into the little bottle. And I say that pejoratively, but I'm a pharmacist and I feel like I can say that. We are not the people that spent half a decade in school to take pills from the big bottle and put them into the little bottle. That is not our role. That is not something that we need to hold on to. That is something that technology is rapidly moving us past. And I'm going to talk about some of the other things that hopefully you're seeing in your communities in states that allow this, and you will see in communities like Arizona. Arizona did a test and treat bill. I'll talk a little bit about what that is last year. I'm going to show you some video clips of the hearing that was held by the Senate Health Committee. The bill did not pass last year. The bill did not pass for purely political reasons and has nothing to do with the typical political reasons of turf battle or other things. The bill passed out of both committees, both health committees in the Senate and the House without objections. It passed the Senate floor, but it got to the House floor way too late in the legislative session. It got bogged down by some budget fights between the legislature and our governor, and the Speaker of the House never brought it to the floor. He never brought it to the floor, mostly because there wasn't enough groundswell support. Pharmacists didn't show up in droves and sit in the gallery and stare down the speaker on the last day. Patients weren't there demanding that they get better access to medications and tests in the pharmacies. And so he didn't consider it a priority. We're going to try to change that this year and reintroduce the bill. So I'm going to do a case study at the end. And one of the fun things about doing a webinar is I get to show some video. So what are we talking about? We're talking about prescriptive authority across the board. Lots of people don't realize this. There's a legal and a practical issue to what I talk about when I say prescriptive authority. I promise you, in all 50 states and in each one of the territories, pharmacists have some ability to order independently on their own a medication that says prescription use only. In all of the states, that might be a vaccine that they've been authorized to administer, a flu shot, other types of vaccines, pneumococcal, shingles, other types of vaccines. It could be oral contraceptives. One of the things that fascinates me is that we live in a world where, where pharmacists can prescribe oral contraceptives without any intervention from a physician. I'm 56 years old. I graduated from pharmacy school in 1995. I never imagined there would be a world in which a woman could come into a pharmacy and in Arizona, the age is 18, and ask their pharmacist for prescription only hormone contraceptive therapy. And the pharmacist has protocols that are in place. Protocols have been written by the Pharmacy Association and the Association of OBGYNs, and it provides tremendous access. I was surprised at Arizona for two reasons. One is Arizona is a particularly red state. When it comes to women's health, particularly women's reproductive health, it is a battle. It's not always centered around abortion or emergency contraception. You also have an enormous population of Catholics here, and the Catholics have issues with premarital sex and also have issues with contraception in particular. And so you hit those roadblocks from time to time. And just full disclosure, I'm a Catholic pharmacist. One of the things that I talked about with the Catholic caucus was why not expand access to oral contraception if it's safe, if the OBGYNs trust us to do it, because if there's anything that Catholics abhor, it is abortion. And if we can be helpful in helping prevent unwanted pregnancies, then let's do everything we can to do that. And that's something that helped push the Catholic caucus over to what I call the good side of the argument, which was, hey, we're healthcare providers first, and if we can do it safely, let's expand access. So oral contraception is probably one of the best known secrets that women have available to them in Arizona and many other states. We also have prescriptive authority, and this is where our federal authority comes from, to prescribe Paxlovid. And many of the states have adopted the federal authority that allowed us to write for Paxlovid during the COVID epidemic and now post-epidemic for patients who test positive for COVID-19. COVID-19. And someday I'm wondering when we're going to change the name of COVID-19 to what we usually did and just update the variant to the current year. We must be on 100+ variants. Normally we would call it COVID-26, but we don't, because if it's uniquely a derivative of COVID-19, we're just going to keep that name for forever. What's the public health rationale for pharmacists involved in prescribing certain medications? Certainly it's to improve access. Arguably, and this has been the case for decades, pharmacists are the single most accessible healthcare provider. In major metropolitan areas, there will be a pharmacy open 24 hours a day with a licensed pharmacist there to take care of you. Most rural communities have at least one pharmacist or a pharmacist nearby. There's a community in Arizona that is very, very remote. It's in eastern Arizona. It's about an hour north of Safford, for any of you who are have any familiarity with the Arizona landscape. Arizona is an interesting state. Most people picture saguaro cacti. Those are the ones that have the green arms and are in every cartoon about a desert. The saguaro cacti only exist in the Sonoran Desert here in Arizona and northern Mexico. They're very, very beautiful plants. They're huge. A little bit of trivia about the saguaro cactus. Saguaro cactus that you see in the cartoons and in the photos are very, very old. They grow very, very slow, and they're 75 years old before they start growing their first arm. So most of the cacti you see that are very tall and have multiple arms are well over 150, 200 years old, and they live forever. And interestingly enough, they take many, many years to die. When a cactus has died, it will stay green, and it's got a wooden skeleton in it for years after it dies, and then it'll just fall down. And the skeleton, the wooden skeleton, is actually quite pretty, and you find those on the desert floor, and we usually leave those alone. They are a protected plant. But what I'm saying is in Safford, it's very, very remote. It's by Mount Graham. It's the second largest mountain in Arizona. Its peak is about 10,000 feet, maybe 9,500. The largest peak in Arizona is in Flagstaff, the San Francisco peaks, we call them. But they have very, very remote area. And in eastern Arizona and in western Arizona and southern Arizona, if you're not in Phoenix, Tucson, Flagstaff, or Yuma, usually your only healthcare providers are pharmacists. And so anytime we can increase accessibility on weekends, evenings, in areas where you just don't have access to primary care, and you want to prevent a strep outbreak, you want to prevent and treat COVID to prevent an outbreak, those are the things that the legislature is looking to. Solutions to healthcare provider shortages. We've been worried about primary care healthcare for a long time. We don't pay our primary care doctors enough money. In most places, pharmacists make more money than pediatricians and internists and family practice doctors. They are just as much a victim of low reimbursement rates as pharmacy is. But for the large corporations that can keep the salaries up and keep these pharmacies open, because they have other lines of business, and that's what we're talking about here, expanding lines of business so that the pharmacies don't go away. All right, so this is part of your ACPE accreditation. We're going to do a poll. So, and I don't even know if I answered the question correctly or gave you the information, but you seem to be tracking correctly. I'll give it a moment. Most of you have voted. Go on to the next one. It is A. Every one of you, except for the person that says federal mandates requiring pharmacist prescribing, was right. What was wrong with C? I talked about COVID. I talked about a federal mandate that allowed pharmacists to prescribe Paxlovid for COVID-19. Well, the government didn't mandate that we write it, and that's what made that answer incorrect. So let me move on to the slides here. Let's talk about test and treat. Test and treat is a colloquialism for point of care testing. These are CLIA waived tests that pharmacies in states that allow test and treat can purchase and administer to their patients and then treat their patients. So the testing part is the CLIA waived point of care test. The treat part is selecting the appropriate therapy, whether it be an antiviral, antibiotic, or other prescription-only medication without the intervention of a physician or mid-level prescriber. They are protocol-driven. They are black and white tests. If you test positive for strep, you shall give amoxicillin. There isn't much authority for the pharmacist to pick. So the pharmacist can't jump to Augmentin, for example. The pharmacist can't jump to another broad spectrum antibiotic because there are other symptoms that could indicate something other than or something in addition to a gram-positive infection. This is important for antimicrobial stewardship, and it was also important to make sure we were good partners with the prescribers. If first-line agents don't work, then we absolutely positively need to counsel them about how to know if it's not working and what to do next, which is seeking treatment from someone else that has a medical degree, like physician, nurse practitioner, or a physician assistant. There are states that have pharmacist practitioners. Those mid-level providers could be also a second line of treatment if necessary. Arizona doesn't have pharmacist practitioners. The test and treat protocols include things like testing for flu, strep, COVID-19, and we don't test for HIV prevention, but in most states, we can prescribe prophylactic therapy for HIV prevention following a screening of the patient, determine that A, they're not HIV positive, or at least have not been diagnosed as HIV positive, have meet a high risk exposure criteria, and then get a referral to an appropriate provider. The key stats from 2025, the last I counted, 13 states allow pharmacists full test and treat authority without collaborative agreements. What do I mean by that? What's a collaborative agreement? A collaborative practice agreement is a contract between a prescriber and a pharmacist to perform delegated activities that the prescriber believes the pharmacist can do, is safe to do, and is supervised by that prescriber, albeit in direct supervision. Arizona has the ability for pharmacists to write collaborative practice agreements with prescribers. They don't need pre-approval from either the medical board, nursing board, or the pharmacy board. And one of the pushbacks I got from the medical lobby was, why do you need test and treat in Arizona if you can do a collaborative practice agreement? And here's the answer. The answer is my collaborative practice agreement only covers the patients that that doctor has a relationship with. So if I'm working at a community pharmacy, a Walgreens, a CVS, or an independently owned pharmacy, I can only do test and treat under a collaborative practice agreement if that patient is a patient of the doctor that I have a collaborative practice agreement with. And there aren't going to be that many people. I'm not going to be able to take care of everyone because presumably most of the people are going to come in who are patients of some other doctor or have no doctor relationship established at all. In today's environment, we tried during the President Obama administration to deal with the underinsurance and uninsured treatment or patient gap. People who do not qualify for Medicaid, but also cannot afford commercial insurance. The healthcare marketplace was a great attempt and a great idea at getting health insurance to everyone, but we haven't seen it yet. There's still a huge number, millions of people who either make too much money to get a healthcare marketplace subsidy, but not enough money to buy an individual policy because they're either self-employed or they're independent contractors or meet some other category where they just don't work for an employer that has group health insurance. My law firm has had group health insurance since its inception, since there were just two of us, my partner and I. But I'll be honest with you, as an attorney and as a sophisticated healthcare shopper, it took me forever to figure out how to get the two of us, let alone now the 23 of us, affordable health insurance. And I say affordable almost sarcastically. The premiums for a family are about $1,300 a month. There's still a $5,000 deductible. We have an HSA to help supplement that. But one of my favorite memes that many of you have probably seen on social media is, what if you paid for Netflix every month, and then every time you wanted to watch a movie, you paid for that, and then if within that movie one of the actors wasn't a part of the network, that actor sent you a bill, and then it says this is a post about healthcare. Too many people are just saying, I can't afford it. I'd rather pay out of pocket. They're living life off of primary care, urgent cares, I call them. These are the little minute clinics inside the Walgreens, the CVS, and even your independent stores. And they'll see a mid-level provider in Arizona. NPs and PAs can practice independently. And they'll set up these shops and they'll charge people a very affordable cash rate. And then they'll send them to the pharmacy. In pharmacies that don't have those types of providers, this is where test and treat can come in handy, at least for some of the routine things that require immediate therapy. Flu, as you know, needs to be administered within 72 hours of diagnosis. Otherwise, Tamiflu is not going to work. Strep is incredibly painful and requires immediate antibiotics because it's the risks of not treating it are rather dire. And COVID-19, obviously. And then HIV prevention. If we can get people, if we can pass out more of that to people who have high risk factors, we could do a lot of damage. And by damage, I mean good things to the conversion of HIV in the population of folks who would otherwise get it. 30 states allow pharmacists to conduct CLIA waive tests. I'm not really sure necessarily about the value of that if I can't treat them afterwards, but at least I can have someone can come in without an appointment, get a rapid flu, get a rapid strep test, and if they turn out positive, we can try to reach out to the prescriber. Patient can try to reach out to the prescriber and say, yeah, you absolutely need treatment. I suppose the benefit of the CLIA waive test without the treat authority is it'll keep a bunch of people out of the urgent cares and doctor's offices who are just sick, who just have a virus and will not benefit and could actually lead to problems with antimicrobial stewardship if we overtreat them. Giving them the peace of mind, you don't have strep throat, I'm sorry, but rest, fluids, checking in if this doesn't get better within a few days. Those are things that we can do to help keep people from running to very, very expensive emergency rooms and urgent cares. And then you've got collaborative practice agreements. I wrote many states, not because I'm lazy, but I think it's all of the states have some form of collaborative practice agreement, and if not all of them, almost all of them. This is a list of the states that have a full prescriptive authority under test and treat without a collaborative practice agreement. And what I thought was remarkable about this list is there is no pattern. There are all of the states, and I don't care which one you are, including California, have very, very rural areas. So all states have rural areas. But there are a combination of blue states, red states. This is an apolitical issue. Although later on in the presentation, when I give you the Arizona perspective, you're going to see some politics at play here. And it doesn't necessarily go down Republican or Democrat lines, but you'll see it. It's interesting to me that at least in Arizona, the Republicans appear to be more receptive to this than the Democrats. The Democrats are more conservative on the issue of, are pharmacists trained well enough to perform these services safely? Whereas the Republicans, and I'm not sure why, I know all of them. I'm friends with many of them. Don't know why it tends to go down political lines, but that's just an observation. So last year, in the 2024-2025 legislative session, Arizona launched its test and treat bill, SB 1214. It would allow us to perform, us meaning pharmacists, CLIA wave tests for flu, group-based strep, minor respiratory illnesses. This is RSV without saying RSV. And I wouldn't describe RSV as minor, but politically, that was the language we used to try to sneak it by. We thought that was important that it get in the list, but RSV just set off the prescribers. And then to initiate PrEP and PEP for HIV prevention. Our argument was it's going to reduce burden on urgent cares. You're going to see a little bit in the video clips I have of the debate on urgent care. And there's a simultaneously funny, sad, but very, very good slide for my good friend, Senator from Paradise Valley, who supports us, but I argue for all the wrong reasons, and you'll find out in a minute. All right, question 2, another poll. Oh, somehow I pressed the button and I already skipped to the answer. For those of you, just apologize for that. I'll go through the answers here. So which statement best describes the current state of pharmacist prescriptive authority in the United States? Pharmacists may prescribe independently in only a handful of pilot states. That's wrong because pharmacists have prescriptive authority in every state, even if it's just immunizations. B is wrong because there's lots of other states that allow more than vaccines and immunizations. The correct answer is pharmacists in all U.S. states have some sort of prescriptive authority ranging from collaborative to autonomous models. And then pharmacists may only prescribe under direct supervision in all states. That is not true. Some states, but not all. Back here. So here we go. I promised a case presentation. I'm going to get you into the case presentation here. These are some of the actors, real life people. They're not actors that you're going to see in the video clips that I've provided. The proponents of the test and treat bill are people like the Arizona Pharmacy Association. My good friend, Don Gerber, who is geriatric board certified pharmacist clinician, who is also faculty at Midwestern University Glendale campus, is going to be one of your heroines of this story. She's going to try to, the best she can, convince the legislature that the pharmacist's educational background will support this. Dawn does a really nice job. She is very nervous though. So as you watch her, she's a better speaker than that, but it is very intimidating to talk to state legislators. And one of the things I want to tell this audience is you shouldn't be intimidated. State legislators are regular people, and state legislators want to be liked by people. They need people to vote for them in order for them to become a legislator or to get reelected. And they come from all walks of life. My very first job out of pharmacy school was working on Capitol Hill for United States Senator John McCain. Why did I do that with a pharmacy degree? Well, for one thing, I thought it would be fun. I started as an intern in his Tucson office at the University of Arizona, where I was attending pharmacy school. The dean of students accused me of trying to get out of a more difficult class by selecting, instead of geriatrics or antibiotics or oncology as one of my electives, I asked for an independent study to work as an intern for Senator McCain. And the dean of students knows me very well. I was absolutely looking for something easier than one of those elective classes. But it was also early 90s. President Clinton was in office. The First Lady, Hillary Clinton, was working with a gentleman named Ira Magaziner on a complete healthcare reform package. It was, I'll call it the Affordable Care Act version 1 that never passed. And I was at that time a younger person, 22, 23 years old, and I was a proud card-carrying voter that said no party on it. I didn't even register as an independent because independent is a party in Arizona. And I'm like, I am not taking sides. That is dumb. You vote for the best person on their merits and their character and their knowledge, and I'm not picking sides. And other than that, I didn't really know much about politics. But what I did know is that I would probably fail antibiotics. I couldn't spell most of them. And so I said, well, let me apply for one of these congressional internships. I'll probably just answer the phone and respond to whatever gopher tasks the staff needed in Tucson, which is true. But I'll be in a place where I'll learn something. And what I understood about the comprehensive healthcare reform that the Clinton administration had proposed is it was many hundred pages long. It didn't talk about comprehensive use of pharmacists anywhere in that bill. And I thought, well, this is a profession I'm going to be in. I should learn a little bit of something about politics and how it works. And I fell in love with it. People ask me whether you're Republican or Democrat. And I say I'm a Republican because I am. And I'm a Republican because of Senator John McCain. I like to refer to myself as a Reagan-McCain Republican. And I might have been a Democrat, but when I sent out my resume to Senator DeConcini's office, who's a Democrat, and Senator Colby's office, neither one of them called me back. McCain did, so Republicans win. They gave me a job. And so I did that. And I'm a proud card-carrying Republican to this day. I'm a very moderate Republican because I'm a Reagan-McCain Republican, and I love working across the aisle and trying to make everyone just calm down a little bit. And I'm pretty good at it. I'm proud of some of the accomplishments we've been able to do. So anyway, here we are. Here are the proponents, and I was one of them. I helped lobby for this bill. The Arizona Pharmacy Association was there. Arizona pharmacists were obviously in favor of this. And the Arizona Retailers Association was in charge of this. Now, note, the Arizona Retailers Association is obviously represents retailers in general, but they're also the NACDS affiliate for the National Association of Chain Drugstores. So that's why they were there. The opponents, you will see one opponent. It is two opponents. They are the two medical associations. The Arizona Medical Association represents the allopaths. We call it ARMA. I give them a hard time because Arizona's initials are not AR, they're AZ. Arkansas is AR, but they're called ARMA because AZMA was too long to talk about. And then the Arizona Osteopathic Medical Association would be obviously the osteopaths. And then there were some pharmacists who were opponents. It's not a typo. Why? We're in a post-COVID area. Particularly pharmacists working in the community setting don't want anything else to do. They have been short-staffed since COVID. Staffing hasn't recovered. There's too much to do. And whether they want to do test and treat or not, giving them another task is not something that's on their to-do list. There's too much to do, and they worry that their employers are not going to give them enough support, but are going to force them into this. And they're opponents, mostly to the NACDS affiliate in Arizona. There were a number of objections. one of the most smart objections from one of the legislators that you may catch in the speeches that I'm going to show you in a minute is why not focus on the intrinsic need? Why not invest in more educational opportunities or incentivize people to become primary care providers? That's the intrinsic need. Why is it that someone is coming out of medical school with hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt, not going to seek a specialty? How would a pediatrician who makes $98,000 a year afford their student loans? Let's focus on that. Let's focus on debt forgiveness. Let's focus on state level debt forgiveness. Let's focus on all kinds of things to try to keep doctors here and incentivize doctors to go to school. The answer you're going to see is that policymakers aren't ready yet to just say yes on policy grounds. They need to cover their excuse and their actions with the opposition. They need to cover to excuse their actions with the opposition. You'll see that. They want to say, what I mean by that is they want to say yes to this proposal, but they also want to protect the prescribers. Part of the intrinsic need is if we're just going to turn over all this stuff to the pharmacists, then are we really incentivizing people to go to medical school? And then isn't there a shortage of pharmacists? These are legislators asking these questions. Will this make it worse? And that's a valid criticism. I would argue there is not a shortage of the number of people with a pharmacy degree, but there is a shortage of people who want to and can work in high volume community pharmacies. For those of you who do that, it is rough. I practiced community pharmacy before I practiced law full time. I love community pharmacy. But what I didn't love was the drive-through. I couldn't help thinking that when I was working at Wendy's, one of the reasons as a teenager, one of the reasons why I went to college, so I wouldn't have to work at a drive-through. And then they pulled the rug out from under me in the 90s when they added drive-throughs. I'm like, here I am, I'm back at the drive-through. It's a little demoralizing and deprofessionalizes us a little bit, but it's also convenient. When I'm a father of twins and I understood the drive-through when my wife, who is practically a single mom while I'm trying to get my law degree and practice pharmacy during the day, I get the drive-through for the mom with twins. I get the drive-through for the inclement weather when you just don't feel good, and I understand it now. But is it going to make it worse? These are good questions that policymakers tried to ask. Here's Dawn. This is a little bit of the sausage making. This is an interaction between Senator Mitzi Epstein. She represents the Phoenix suburbs, and she's also the Senate Minority Leader, and she's a Democrat because she's a Minority Leader.
Center and simulation labs that the other medical provider education programs use as well. At this time, I am happy to take any questions.
So she just talked about the educational experience of pharmacists.
Chair, not enough sure if you're the one to answer this, but my concern is, are there enough pharmacists out there? We have work shortages in every single field, and I want to make sure that we have enough pharmacists doing the work that they do and not adding to their plate so that we don't have enough people doing pharmacy work.
So that's not a bad question.
Center and simulation.
Now, Dawn's going to answer a question from Senator Fernandez. He represents Yuma, Western Phoenix suburbs, and Tucson. Anybody who's familiar with the geography knows that is a ginormous chunk of land. Yuma is on the California, Arizona, Mexico border. Western Phoenix is 4 hours away, and Tucson is 4.5 hours away. So he has both metro and a huge chunk of rural Arizona. And he also represents a city called Ajo. It's on the Mexican border, right before Rocky Point. Very attractive place to go for Arizonans. Mexican beaches are the closest beaches to Arizona. Ajo is on the way. Ajo used to have the only pharmacy between Yuma and Tucson, apart from an Indian Health Service facility that's not open to the public. And he has no pharmacies for huge stretches of Arizona.
Person and Senator Epstein, I can tell you that there are shortages in all healthcare professions, and that's a problem. I don't have a primary care doctor. Haven't had one for 3 years now, because every year I get somebody new and then they leave. So it's across the field. I can just tell you we're all suffering, and patients are suffering for all the reasons that we've already discussed today. And so let's help lighten the load so that the prescribers can focus on, the providers, the physicians can focus on those higher level patients, and let everyone else who is equipped and educated to help support the patient community during times of shortage.
Madam Chair, just to follow up on that, Dr. Gerber, I'm grateful to have spoken with your class. It was really a great opportunity. I have that same issue with the shortages. I represent Yuma, Goodyear, Tucson, and Yuma, our hospital system is always looking for pharmacists. Our drugstores are always looking for pharmacists. It's a real issue, and when they find them, a lot of times they'll leave to go somewhere else for some more money or better hours. I fear that I have other issues with this bill, but I fear that by adding these responsibilities, that we're just going to be creating this sort of an uneven playing field for people that are looking for pharmacists. And when I say people looking for pharmacists, I'm talking about the employers that are looking for them.
Sure. Person.
All right. So don't worry, though. Senator Epstein and Senator Fernandez seem a little cold on the bill. But we got my buddy, Senator Carroll. He's the majority whip. For those of you who always want to know what a whip is, it is what it sounds like. His job is working for the caucus, and in this case, he's a Republican because he's a majority whip, and he whips people into shape to vote for things that are consistent with the party's values and the party's leadership views. And he's the office you'll call, the Senate president will call and say, hey, do we have enough votes to pass this bill? Because I don't want to run it if it's going to get voted down. He's responsible for counting the votes before the votes actually happen. He's a supporter.
Forward. So my question for you basically is, doing this in the interim, I'll use that word, the interim. And I don't know what the interim looks like. We may be able to, with the other legislation that may come out here, successfully fill those shortfalls. But until that time, somebody like my age, I'm just a kid, 25, and others, whatever the age group is, their children, the parents, grandparents. In the meantime, what do we do for them to satisfy their needs to be fulfilled if the opportunity is there? And if that's the case, going forward, we do this. Okay, can we take a look back and say this worked or it didn't work and decide to end it if that's the case? How would you feel about that? Forward.
So I'm going to wrap this up because I was late and I don't want to get into the other piece. And I'm not going to have time for questions probably, but I apologize. But let me wrap this up. They talk about urgent cares a little bit here, and but the lawmakers worry about the cost of urgent cares. They are not the solution.
As much as $200 just to go in and see, and sometimes $300 just for one single pill. So there also are significant costs associated with urgent cares as well.
So that was in response to, obviously, why don't the urgent cares just fill this need? And that's a ridiculous thing. They running a rapid strep test and getting a prescription for an antibiotic isn't the role of the urgent care. I'm going to skip this one. Senator Ortiz from Phoenix gets it. But so does Senator Payne, and I'll wrap up with this slide, is Senator Payne's a supporter, but for all the wrong reasons, and it broke my heart when he said this, and he's a good friend of mine, and I talked to him about this afterwards, but this is what he gets.
I guess I better replace that with water. Madam Chair, explain my vote?
Yes, please.
Thank you. I think pharmacies could be considerably less in urgent care because they don't have so much high-tech equipment and stuff to just count pills.
Yeah, so Senator Payne's all aboard because we got nothing else to do except take pills from the big bottle, put in the little bottle. But Arizona died a bill, lonely on Capitol Hill there. We don't have a hill in our capital, but we're launching again this year. And with that, I'll end my presentation with question 3 and the CE code shortly to follow. That's the answer.
Hello again, welcome back. Hopefully everyone's feeling recharged after lunch for our final 2 topics. Our first afternoon session will be led by Dr. Jake Nichols. We'll be focusing on expanding the pharmacist's role in addressing substance use disorder. Dr. Nichols is a recognized leader, honored by Drug Topics magazine as the Massachusetts Pharmacist of the Year in 2001, and recognized by the Massachusetts Pharmacist Association as Pharmacist of the Year in 2014. Dr. Nichols has held various roles focused on substance use disorder, including Director of Medical Affairs Recovery Division with U.S. World Meds, Principal Clinical Product Strategy focused on substance use disorder, and a clinical specialist for substance use disorder. He currently serves as the co-founder and chief medical officer at Ignite Biomedical. His presentation today will explore current data related to overdose, SUD treatment options, and how pharmacists can actively support SUD patients. Thank you, Dr. Nichols. It is a pleasure to have you with us today. Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Danielle. It's an absolute pleasure and an honor to be with all of you today. What we're going to do is just kind of, run through the state of the state as it relates to our profession, our involvement in substance use disorder. I am also in long-term recovery. I've been working in the field for the past 15 plus years, which again is the amount of time I've been in long-term recovery and in many different roles, many of which Danielle was nice enough to outline. And I'll always work in this field. After finding myself in treatment back in 2010 with a 15-year history of substance use, I fell in love with this field and I wanted to be able to share my experience and help others, but also realize that our profession had a great deal to learn. As many health professions do, we are not unique in any way. You'll see some of the facts and figures around how stigma affects different areas of healthcare as it relates to addiction. But again, I'd like to share all that in the context of my experience of recovery and of working in this field as well. So my disclosures, again, Danielle mentioned this. I worked for a company called U.S. World Meds, which had a medication for opioid withdrawals. I ended that employment back in November 2024 when I went full-time as the founder and chief medical officer here at Ignite Biomedical. And what we do there is develop blood-based biomarker tests from AI that, with very high degree of accuracy, can predict treatment response, diagnose disease, and also be used as drug targets. So what I'd like to do in particular, we'll summarize current trends related to substance use and unintentional overdose. It's sometimes very hard to separate what the true nature is of this field just based on how much we're bombarded with social media and other reports. A lot of studies being done. It's sometimes hard to interpret that data and again, what it means for the field. But I'll run through some of that real briefly. I promise you I won't bore everybody, right after lunch with a ton of very dry statistics. So we'll do that pretty quickly. We'll talk about harm reduction, which has become a very popular topic over the past maybe 5 to 10 years. And there's been a lot of discussion of getting our profession involved in this as well. I'm sure all of us agree this is a very highly debated topic that honestly depends on which administration is in office and how they feel about this. And again, happy to comment on what some of the current thinking is around this. We'll talk about the contributors to stigma, and I'll say flat out from the beginning, stigma is the biggest driver that's preventing us from making really significant progress in getting a hold of this epidemic. And again, I'll break it down in how it affects our profession, but also healthcare as a whole. And then how do we employ these strategies to reduce stigma when engaging patients with SUD? And I'll talk about a few very, very simple things that you can do regardless of the practice setting that you work in. So what have we seen? So the 2025 numbers aren't fully released yet, but what we did see was a huge decrease in fatal drug overdoses in 2024. That was around 27%. And you may have seen the White House promoting a very similar number. And it looks like we're trending towards that for 2025 once that data is released. So there's a lot of hope. I hope people don't become complacent with that number. I mean, we haven't seen a drop like that in years. So again, very, very positive. I don't want to downplay that at all. When we look at kind of the numbers, and there's this massive survey that's done every year by SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, that basically calls hundreds of thousands of people around the country and asks them, certain questions about mental health and substance use. And, we saw that people reporting decreases in opioid use, stimulant use, and cocaine as well. When we look at 68% of overdose deaths involving opioids and 88% were due to fentanyl analogs. I saw that you heard from one of my favorite people on the planet this morning, named Amy Neville. And I'm sure Amy told you the horrific story of the loss of her son, Alexander. Tragic. We hear those stories far too often. But those are due to fentanyl analogs. And this is a big area we as pharmacists can help explain to people what exactly a fentanyl analog is, because there's a tremendous amount of confusion on this. Initially, in the beginning of this year, we actually saw an uptick in overdose deaths, and people started to, for lack of a better term, freak out because, again, we saw the tides turn a little bit. Thank God that did not persist. And again, the provisional data suggests that we did see a perpetual or a continuous decline, after that short blip early in 2025. And again, this is the first time we saw this in 17 months. So generated a little bit of concern. Fentanyl analogs. And again, we understand this better than anybody. So, there's still some confusion around where this fentanyl is coming from. And again, most people say, well, it's coming from China. And that's definitely primarily true for the fentanyl that ends up in the illicit drug market. It is not diverted fentanyl. It's not fentanyl hydrochloride or fentanyl citrate that we're using or dispensing, in our practices. But these are chemicals that are either synthesized from a novel perspective, or they were studied long ago and literally put on a shelf because they had no pharmaceutical use, or a pharmaceutical company didn't think they could commercialize these products. And as we know, an analog just means, you have a base molecule of fentanyl, and we add certain functional groups to it. And as we know, and I'm sure this brings many of us back, including myself, to organic and medicinal chemistry, which 25 years later, I still have nightmares about. But, adding some of these functional groups completely changes the pharmacokinetics and pharmacodynamics of fentanyl. And the problem with that is, since we've never really studied most of these chemicals, we don't know what those kinetic parameters look like. We don't know the potency of these agents on a milligram to milligram basis. And, this is intentional. The cartels do this to keep us guessing. And if you ever follow kind of drug trends of what's being found, out there, what people are overdosing on, or is found in the illicit drug supply, you'll see you have pockets here and there. First it was carfentanil, right? And then we started to wrap our arms around that. And then it was furylfentanyl. So the cartels do this on purpose to kind of keep us guessing and to keep the market fresh. And that's very, very intentional. But again, this is something that we as pharmacists can explain better than anybody. And why this fentanyl epidemic is so unique. It's because, we have so many of these different analogs that are out there, and we just don't know what they do. Just to give you an idea, we initially had 5 or 6 of these back in 2017 when they first started to pop up. And by 2020, we had identified over 25 of them. And those are the last numbers I've seen published. It was a very interesting article. I don't cite it here, but they did it from a mathematical perspective, and they calculated the number of potential fentanyl analogs that could be created, and it was hundreds of thousands. And again, just thinking back to that previous slide, again, you could just keep changing functional groups over and over again, and again, create these completely new molecules. When we look at fentanyl seizures, 2 pounds in 2013. By 2018, that was 2,000 pounds. And again, I haven't seen any recent numbers reported, but I think it's down just because of changes in border policy and some other things. But I don't know that for sure, to be completely transparent. And what has this done for overdose reversal? Well, we're still kind of figuring this out, but a lot of people initially just felt that, okay, these are more potent molecules. We're going to need more naloxone to reverse that overdose. And we actually have found that's probably not the case. And a lot of these higher dose or stronger opioid antagonist products have kind of lost favor in the market. And again, I'll talk more about that. But just to give you a number that's been published, it's anywhere between 1 and 2 doses is able to adequately reverse most overdoses. Again, if individuals are doing it correctly and quickly calling 911 as well. The other thing, again, I'm sure everybody's heard about this, but the addition of these alpha-2 agonists to the drug supply, and why would they do that? Well, just to jump to that last bullet, it's just an additive psychoactive substance that provides a synergistic sedative effect. Yes, these drugs have some opioid-like properties, but the effect on opioid receptors isn't really what the issue is here. It's more the sedative effect. Xylazine itself, as you know, has no FDA-approved uses in humans, but used frequently in veterinary medicine as a sedative, anesthetic, muscle relaxant, and an analgesic. What we are seeing more commonly now than xylazine, xylazine is kind of the old news, is medetomidine and dexmedetomidine, Precedex, drugs that we use in the ICU. Which are extremely, extremely potent, obviously are not going to respond to naloxone because they're not opioids and they're not working at the opioid receptor. So it makes the reversal of overdose much more challenging. It's found in probably about 1 out of 4, fentanyl powder samples, and about 10% or more of illicit fentanyl pills that are pressed. But it's relatively common, and this stuff is pretty nasty. It really, again, as I mentioned, complicates the management of overdose. You get a prolonged sedation that really all we can do is provide respiratory support. Significant potential for skin wounds, and I didn't want to include any of the pictures because they're quite graphic. But this is a very caustic chemical. And, some of the pictures, and I've seen some live, examples of this as well. People literally have these craters in their arm or any place that they're injecting. And, as drug use goes, people will continue to inject into that same area as well. And it just gets worse. People can get septic, gangrenous. So, one of the focuses of harm reduction initiatives has been maybe including wound care, and counseling around appropriate wound care and providing people with gauze and other sterile supplies to do this. But it's a very tough to treat wound. It's not something you can put, bacitracin on and just walk away and it's going to be okay. It can be really, really tough. And again, most people will present, with very, very severe ulcerations. Just to wrap up some other kind of facts and figures, cocaine use has dropped and that's continued to drop over the past couple of years. Prescription opioid misuse is dropping as well. Those numbers don't look like a lot, but they are relatively significant when you apply that across the population. But we are seeing rises in hallucinogen use from 2.7 to 3.6%. Some people have attributed that to the increased awareness or use of psychedelics, to treat PTSD and other anxiety-related disorders. And we have some pharmaceutical companies that are working on bringing those to market legitimately, and the results have been very, very interesting. And then, of course, cannabis use rose as well, pretty significantly, and obviously this is due to the increase in medicalization and legalization of recreational cannabis, which also led to a corresponding rise in cannabis use disorder. And I guarantee you will see that continue to rise. This is the number I'm really fascinated to see published for 2025 in this NSDUH survey to see what that number is. And again, to keep in mind, we don't talk about this the rest of the presentation, but we don't have any FDA-approved drugs for cannabis use disorder. There's one that's kind of going through clinical trials right now, but that's the only one that I can think of. There are some things that we have used in the past that have had kind of mixed results. But believe it or not, the primary one that a lot of the cannabis use disorder experts in the field use is N-acetylcysteine, which we know is primarily used for Tylenol overdoses. We were all taught in school, but has grown in tremendous popularity as a nutritional supplement to support liver health. But believe it or not, it also moderates glutamate, which we know is pretty dysfunctional in most substance use disorders, but relatively pronounced in cannabis use disorder. But beyond that, we just haven't had much. Past year methamphetamine use, past year prescription stimulant misuse, and past year opioid use disorder remains plateaued, basically. It remained unchanged. So again, we kind of hold our breath with this to see what the following year holds. And this is usually published sometime in March. So keep an eye out for that to see how these trends continue. Regardless of the SUD that we treat, the goals of treatment are pretty intuitive, to be honest. There's nothing, that's as concrete as some of the evidence that we have, like for long-term use of statins and what percentage it reduces a heart attack or a stroke. It's a little bit different with SUD, but it makes it a little bit simpler to actually process. Obviously, we want to prevent death first and foremost, hence why I put it in caps. This is the first and foremost clinical justification for using specifically medications for opioid use disorder. Methadone and buprenorphine have conclusively, over and over and over again for the past few decades, been shown to at least cut the risk of death from opioid overdose by half. In some studies, up to 75%. So just by giving somebody buprenorphine or methadone for the treatment of opioid use disorder has a protective effect, and we're keeping that person alive. We're giving them the best chance at staying alive so they can find recovery and maintain it. We reduce overdose death rates. Again, very conclusive. The numbers are very similar to what we see in reducing death rates. I'll tell you here that of the 3 FDA-approved medications we have for opioid use disorder, buprenorphine, methadone, and naltrexone, only buprenorphine and methadone have been proven to actually reduce death associated with opioid use disorder. Naltrexone, either the tablets or Vivitrol, the injection, has never been able to kind of come out in a study and say that, we're able to reduce death rates. Can reduce overdose rates, but it does not prevent death to the degree that buprenorphine and methadone. And again, there's no conclusive claim that can be made. It does anything for that aspect. From an objective standpoint, one of the frustrating things in addiction medicine is we don't have a blood test yet. We don't have anything like that we can measure necessarily besides a urine drug screen, which really just gives us a snapshot in time. And isn't something that we want to use in a punitive sense, but more of a disease monitoring perspective. So the best we can do is engagement in treatment. Obviously, if somebody's engaged in treatment, they're alive, they're pursuing recovery. And we have correlated that level of engagement with longer-term recovery and abstinence rates. So that's our number one marker anytime we study an intervention for SUD. Obviously, we want to improve quality of life. Many of us, we're in the throes of this, have drastically reduced our quality of life. In many cases, to be honest, the quality of life of people around us. These medications have been proven to improve quality of life by doing a lot of different things. For example, in improving social engagement, improving work productivity, reducing legal issues, all of the kind of more quote unquote soft benefits that you may attribute to treatment. One of the things we knew very, very early on with methadone was that we can reduce the transmission of bloodborne illness. And this is another reason why we, support certain harm reduction perspectives. And that's why, many years ago, it became legal in most states for people to just walk into a pharmacy and say, I need a bag of syringes. The goal there is certainly not to facilitate drug use, it's to prevent the transmission of bloodborne illness. And then again, the objective piece, if we can reduce the incidence of positive urine drug screens, that's one piece of the tool kit that we look at. Obviously, if people are continuing to have positive urine drug screens, it means that they're probably not in the right level of care. We may need to intensify treatment a little bit more. So I want to talk specifically about the medications for opioid use disorder. And again, I'm not going to give you a ton of details. This is just kind of a primer and really focusing on the issues that affect us as pharmacists. We have a few now. And historically, this goes back to 1970 on the heels of the Controlled Substances Act, where we had a lot of folks coming home from Vietnam that were addicted to opioids. We had an explosion of heroin in this country, particularly in New York. And it was determined by the federal government that, okay, we need to treat these folks. And previous to that, some very, I would say smart, for lack of a better term, clinicians hypothesized that methadone being a very unique opioid, in terms of its pharmacokinetics and its additional receptor properties beyond the opioid receptor, theorized that maybe we could, if we treated folks with a daily dose of methadone, could we stabilize their cravings and keep them from using illicit substances, illicit opioids in particular? And we had evidence to show that. So we were able to establish methadone regulations through opioid treatment programs, where people could go and get a daily dose of methadone that would allow them to basically function. The goal is obviously not to get high off of it. And people at stable methadone doses are not euphoric, they're not getting high, which would again facilitate, social engagement, work productivity, and so forth. And it actually did that. Is far from a perfect model. It still has its issues. And there's a lot of discussion there has been for the past few years of taking this out of that, what I call a very stigmatized treatment model, and putting it in the outpatient sector like we do with buprenorphine, which would also include allowing us as pharmacists to be able to dispense this for the treatment of opioid use disorder, which we're currently obviously not able to do unless we work in an OTP. So that was 1970. It wasn't until 2000, really, that we had another kind of what I'd call groundbreaking treatment. In the meantime, we had naltrexone tablets, the old Revia product from DuPont, that was approved in 1984 for the treatment of what was called opioid addiction at the time, or opioid dependence. Didn't get a lot of utilization. And then, Alkermes, the company out of Waltham, picked up on that and started working with NIDA and, came up with a long-acting injectable product, which came out in 2010, long-acting injectable naltrexone called Vivitrol. But 2000, we had the Data 2000 Act, which, if you will remember, we had, docs initially only 30 patients at a time had to register with the DEA, had to get this X number, had to be on the prescription. And you could dispense this drug buprenorphine, which we had had for years before as an injectable product called Buprenex, which was rarely used, as a partial agonist. And it could be done in an outpatient setting. It's a Schedule III drug. We had the single product called, I've got him blanking on the name. And then we had single buprenorphine, then we had buprenorphine naloxone. Suboxone. Subutex was the single product name, excuse me. And, the idea was, okay, well, that product initially, single agent buprenorphine, was for pregnant women, because we had some questions up until that time of whether or not naloxone was teratogenic. We've since proven that's very likely not the case. And most clinics that treat opioid use disorder in pregnant women will now use the combo product, but, plain buprenorphine still sticks around. There are people that claim they have a naloxone allergy, which is, I think we all know, usually a very, 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 very rare phenomenon to have a true anaphylaxis to naloxone. In fact, I've never seen a case that I would attribute to that in 15 years. But regardless, and then as patents ran out, we had a new product called the film product, which came out again in 2010. And now we have plenty of generics of both of these around. And then the next evolution was the long-acting injectables that we got a few years ago. Started with Sublocade by the Indivior folks who had Suboxone, and then a new entry to the market. Braeburn Pharma came out with Brixadi, which is just gives you a little bit of a different dosing schedule and a little bit more flexible dosing options. But both of these, they have 7 and 28-day injectable formulations, and these get pretty good utilization. So what do? They do a ton. And again, this is just the primary outcomes that you can attribute to use of these medications. Have a tremendous effect on reducing the intensity of withdrawal symptoms. I will never forget my first dose of buprenorphine back in 2010. It's like somebody took the volume on my withdrawals and just turned it down to 1 or 2. Never really, doesn't really get rid of them completely, but it really, really mutes it tremendously. Has a tremendous effect on cravings. You don't find yourself drug seeking. It decreases relapse rates and time to relapse, enhances treatment retention, reduces transmission of bloodborne illness, improves quality of life, facilitates social engagement and productivity, decreases illicit substance use, decreases rates of overdose, and again, reduces the risk of death. So I challenge anybody to find another class of medications that has such a robust list of clinical benefits. And the fact that we still debate this in certain circles, and again, not just us, but other disciplines of clinicians, of whether there's value to using these medications is absolutely astounding to me. Very quick about bup, and you'll see where I'm going with this in a couple of slides. But again, I want you to remember buprenorphine is a very unique agent. It's a mixed agonist-antagonist. And what that means is it partially agonizes the mu receptor, and it blocks another opioid receptor called the kappa receptor. Now, the kappa receptor, we have a general idea of what we think it does, but I'll tell you, we're still not exactly sure. We thought it had an effect on moderating anxiety and reducing depression when you block it. And a company tried to come out with a drug that completely blocked the kappa receptor for the treatment of depression and anxiety, and it failed miserably. So there's something else to it. But we know it's some sort of benefit in the treatment of opioid use disorder, and it's probably modulating mood and anxiety to some degree. It probably needs to happen in conjunction with the agonism at the mu receptor. And again, buprenorphine will partially activate that receptor. It doesn't fully activate it. So there's really not a euphoric feeling you get with this drug. And again, I'm telling you that from experience. And I tested the theory that you couldn't, get high on this, and I snorted it, I injected it, I took extra doses at the beginning. You just don't get that high off of this like you get with full agonist opioids. Now, if you're opioid naive and you take buprenorphine, you certainly will, because your opioid receptors are quote unquote normal. They haven't gone through tolerance or anything. But, if you've been using and you take buprenorphine, there is no high. It binds very strongly to those receptors, and it competes with other agonists, and it will displace other agonists when administered concurrently. And this is where the challenge comes in. So if you're on buprenorphine, it actually has a pretty good protective effect against overdose because it binds so tightly. The problem is fentanyl can have an equal or higher binding affinity. So fentanyl can easily bump off buprenorphine, especially if you use it in larger doses. This has also complicated our ability to initiate people on buprenorphine. We used to have a very predictable induction schedule where we could say, all right, if it's been 12 to 24 hours since the last time you used an opioid, I can put you on buprenorphine without risking a precipitated withdrawal. Because again, if there's opioid that's already on the receptor and you give somebody buprenorphine, it'll bump it off. And your receptor's not going to like that. And as a result, you're going to go into withdrawal. So with fentanyl analogs, again, since we don't know the kinetics of these agents, we can't have that 12 to 24 hour window be as reliable as it used to be. So it's become more challenging to get somebody through that phase. We almost have to treat them symptomatically for a few days until we can safely start them on buprenorphine. Or there is another side to that where people will just say, all right, I'm just going to keep giving more buprenorphine until I'm able to abate those withdrawals. There's, I see 50-50 in the field of people, how they prefer to do it. Again, the agonist effects of bup are less than the maximal effects of full opioid agonists, such as morphine, but they're limited by a ceiling effect. And we hear this a lot about buprenorphine. What does a ceiling effect mean? It doesn't mean a ceiling on efficacy. It's a ceiling on its respiratory depressant effect. There was a graph I used to include in presentations that showed, increasing amounts of buprenorphine being administered and the concurrent decrease in respirations. And you see when you get to about 32 milligrams at the respiratory rate, and when you go beyond that, 64 milligrams, the respiratory rate doesn't drop anymore. So it's a protective drug. And it's very difficult to overdose on buprenorphine alone. Anytime you hear a case of a buprenorphine overdose, I guarantee you if you look, there'll also be alcohol and or benzos or some other CNS depressant in there. And that's why we have the black box warning with buprenorphine administered with benzos. If you administer benzos with buprenorphine, you basically cancel out that ceiling effect. Doesn't mean we can't do it. It's not something I like to do. I can't remember a point where I ever recommended that in practice when clinicians would ask me. But people need to know what the risks are. And, benzos can be very difficult to get somebody off of as well. Very, very difficult. And again, we add naloxone to deter intravenous use in the combo product. I don't know any other way to say it. I think the DEA did this to make themselves feel better years ago because I know people that will happily inject a combination product and not go through withdrawals. It's a relatively small amount. So again, I'm not saying this is a reason to go back to using Subutex, but what its true clinical effect is probably not much. Let me talk a little bit about diversion and misuse. Well, we've done a ton of studies on this at this point. It's about 25%. It happens a lot. But I want you to keep in mind that the primary reason that it's being diverted is not for abuse. It's not to get high. But it's really to avoid or mitigate withdrawal symptoms or the fact that somebody can't get into treatment or they found some period of abstinence and they want to stay abstinent. Now, I'm not justifying this. I'm not saying it's okay to commit a felony to do any of these things, but this is really a reflection of poor access to treatment in many cases. I think this has gotten a little bit better. We haven't done a study on this in a while. As again, you can see these go back to 2021. I think this was the last time I saw a study on this. It's probably gotten a little bit better, but just the process of somebody getting treatment is very, very complex. And it's not just availability, it's somebody finding that point. We don't know how people reach that point of saying, I need help, and I'm going to seek it out. We talk about our profession. This has been a concerning piece. I'm a very active member of the American Society of Addiction Medicine. And again, I've been working in this field for over 15 years. And as a pharmacist, I am regularly criticized for our profession's poor track record at dispensing this. And the number of stories that I've heard from docs and what their patients have gone through, is concerning. And again, I've been on the other side of that counter. I get it. There are always reasons why this could happen. There's always two sides to a story. But now that we've done some studies on this to shed some light on this, it is concerning. They did a relatively large study not too long ago, published in Health Affairs, that really quantified this. And I encourage you, if you're interested in the topic, to take a look at this. But we found that bup was regularly dispensed in only 39% of pharmacies across the U.S. That was up a little bit from 33% in 2017. As you can imagine, there were very large racial disparities by neighborhood and tremendous geographic variability. A lot of the initial studies that were done on this were done in the South. So take that as you will, where we saw, very large rates of non-dispensing or refusing to dispense buprenorphine. Texas was one that just kept popping up, unfortunately. What else did we find in this? In 2023, chain stores were more likely than to regularly dispense bup versus mass merchandisers, food, or independents. But For those independents that did dispense, they tended to do so at twice the rate. And this is not a shot at the chains at all. It's just my experience has been, when a clinic or an addiction provider finds a relationship with a community or independent pharmacist that's willing to work with them and their patients, the results are incredible. And I just wish we had more of that. I wish some of the larger organizations were set up in such a way that we could facilitate more of this, because when it's done well, it really, really works. And there are many of us, that go out of our way to work with patients that struggle with SUD in those clinics. And I just wish there were more. I don't know any other way to say it. There are many reasons for this. And, when I've dug into this in the past, it seems to be a lot of finger pointing, as to why we're not dispensing buprenorphine at the rates we should be. To, it's a company policy, to it's the wholesalers putting, limits on how much I can order, to it's the DEA's quotas, that we can't, surpass. And, you go to any of these organizations and try to get to the bottom of this. And again, it's just all this finger pointing at the other person. So I hope this gets better, because we are still in the midst of an epidemic, and people need these medications. All right, so let's start with a quick self-assessment, our first self-assessment here. Which of the following has been shown to conclusively reduce overdose mortality? Kratom, clonidine, naltrexone, or buprenorphine? I didn't talk about kratom. I'm sure a lot of you have heard of it. It's basically a leaf that's ground up that has these alkaloids called metragenine, which have opioid-like effects. You can buy that pretty much anywhere, in any sort of tobacco shops or even cannabis places, gas stations. Excellent. Buprenorphine is definitely the correct answer. Again, naltrexone has never conclusively been shown to reduce overdose mortality, especially compared to buprenorphine. All right, so let's switch gears a little bit, talk about naloxone. I think we've done a pretty good job as a profession, kind of taking the initial lead on getting naloxone out there. We've been doing this for about 10 years now, or more. Some of us have probably been doing it a lot longer than that. But we had some studies recently published, which, kind of gave us the state of naloxone. Standing orders pharmacy availability appears to have positively impacted reductions in overdose fatalities. This was the first time anybody had ever reported this. And to be honest, we're kind of getting a little bit of flack and being put in the middle of getting naloxone out there in a lot of cases. And most of the times it was unfair, in my opinion. I don't think people realize how difficult it is for us to have a conversation with somebody about taking naloxone home. That's not an easy topic to breach. And I'll get back to that in just a minute. The other studies have also suggested that increased naloxone access may increase emergency department visits and opioid-related theft and have minimal impact on reducing opioid-related mortality. So this threw a little bit back in people's faces. The critics of getting naloxone out there, got a little bit of ammunition, if you will, to carry that message. If you look back at this and you dig into this in a great deal, I think it was a very bold statement to even suggest. But the numbers are the numbers in some areas. Everybody always continues to point to stigma as being the primary barrier to significantly increasing naloxone acceptance. And a couple of more kind of cosmetic things, is naloxone went over the counter. And in many of our pharmacies, naloxone has been put behind the counter. The OTC version has been put behind the counter, or it's locked up. And that, in many cases, unless there's been specific cases where people have been regularly caught trying to walk out of the store with naloxone, is due to stereotyping and stigma. Addicts steal. So if we put this out and open the access, people are going to walk out of here with it. The other thing that people assumed was that, people are going to walk up, the people that do want it are going to have no problem taking this to the counter and ringing it out, and think that they're not going to be judged. I mean, that's the reality of it. So I'll talk a little bit more about OTC in a minute, but and again, I mentioned this is not an easy topic to breach with somebody. It's what do you say? You're obviously an addict. I think you should have naloxone. I mean, obviously being facetious there, but the point is, how do you get to that? There are a couple of things that you can try that I think I know have worked. But it's all in the approach, obviously, the language that we use, the global safety approach. There's an opioid in the house. With your prescription for opioid, we recommend that you take home naloxone, for safety, just in case, somebody by accident gets their hands on this, accidentally ingests any of this. We'd love for you to have this in the house just as a safety net while you're able to call 911. Or the blanket statement. This is something we offer to all patients, not just patients who are picking up prescriptions for opioids or MOUD. This is something that we have a policy here. It's a safety measure that we think everybody should have naloxone in the home, just in case. And again, I'm not naive. I know that you'll get some pretty nasty reactions to some of this because of what people's perceptions of naloxone are, but this is just one approach. When you're talking on a disease-specific or medication-specific perspective, the clinical guidelines for both the treatment of addiction and OUD, as well as treatment of chronic pain for opioids, although we don't like to do that because the data is just terrible. But they do recommend that if you're being treated for OUD, or if you're on an opioid for some sort of chronic condition or even acute, the clinical guidelines by both the American Society of Addiction Medicine and the Centers for Disease Control recommend that naloxone also be co-prescribed. So we can always take the clinical perspective, which in my opinion tends to be the most gentle, if you will. The cost. Obviously, again, going over the counter, most people are not willing to cough up $40 to $50 to take home a box of naloxone. But in many cases, it's covered under insurance plans for free. And if we have a standing order, which we obviously do in this state, we're able to do that. And then the privacy perspective. And again, this is the rate limiting factor just based on the setup of a lot of our pharmacies. How do I have that private conversation? Again, this is not I don't want to walk to the counter with this box in my hand and start having a conversation. I want to be able to have that privately where other people can't see. And most importantly, the person you're talking to can't perceive that other people are seeing that and are judging them. So again, I acknowledge this is not an easy thing to do, but these are some of the tips that you can try. Again, I remember a few years ago, there were so many articles and everybody was talking about OTC naloxone. And many of us in the field were just kind of, I don't want to say we're rolling our eyes, but we're saying, just hold off here. This may not be as easy and it's probably not going to be as robust as we think. And I'm not one to say I was right, but unfortunately that's the case. It just didn't take off in a lot of places. A lot of people can get naloxone for free at community events. Those that want it usually know where to get it. We go to community health centers. A lot of, federally qualified health centers get grants just to be able to give this out. A lot of primary care clinics are doing it now. So it's not hard to get this for free if you really want it. And again, it can also go through your insurance. They did a news poll. Yahoo did a news poll. And they actually looked at over 1,500 adults. And the numbers were pretty dismal. This was just after the release of OTC naloxone. Only about 7% of people actually purchased it from all, ways of purchasing it. 8% have been trained how to use it. 28% said they heard a lot about naloxone, but 43% had little awareness and 29% had heard nothing at all. 20% said they would consider purchasing it. I think we all know what that means. That means probably not. 60% had no interest in purchasing it outright and 20% were unsure. So again, it just kind of solidified what many of us in the field felt, but to me, I'm not completely shutting this down. I think any access points where people can get their hands on naloxone is where we need to be right now. All right, switch gears a little bit about harm reduction, and then we'll wrap up with stigma. So what is harm reduction? There's a, you can look at this website if you like, if you want more information, but I always liked their definition. It states that harm reduction is a set of practical strategies and ideas aimed at reducing negative consequences associated with drug use. Harm reduction is also a movement for social justice built on a belief in and respect for the rights of people who use drugs. It incorporates a spectrum of strategies that includes safer use, managed use, abstinence, meeting people who use drugs where they're at, and addressing conditions of use along with the use itself. So the key phrase in all of that statement is meeting people where they're at. And again, I guarantee you there are many people on this call that are kind of cringing at the thought of this. As a person with 15 years in recovery who has worked in the field for that long, I still have very mixed feelings about this. If I look at it from a clinical perspective strictly, it's easier for me to accept. The problem that I have there is that we don't have a lot of evidence to support some of these initiatives. We don't have a lot of published data, and the data that we do have is actually not very good. And let me start with the most controversial one. And so one on the bottom, safe injection facilities or SIFs. So many of you may have heard about these. They're piloting, quote unquote, these facilities in a few states. And I use the air quotes because many of them are basically underground. They're hidden because of fear of government shutdown. But the idea is somebody who uses drugs can go to one of these facilities with their supply. They can receive clean needles. They can receive wound care. There is a nurse on site. There are individuals that can administer naloxone and basic medical care if necessary. But the sell on this has always been to engage people to get them into treatment. Now, in the places they've done this, we haven't been able to show that that actually works. We haven't really seen reductions in crime as people hoped. We haven't seen an increase in number of people going into treatment. We haven't seen a reduction in overdose deaths in those areas. So the jury is still out on these safe injection facilities. I'm sure many of you have seen some of the clips of the Secretary of Health and Human Services, RFK Jr., over the past few days on the recovery initiatives. They've earmarked $100 million towards, addiction support, which on the surface sounds like a lot of money, but we know from a government perspective that's nothing. It's less than $2 million per state, if I'm doing the math right. And again, I'm not criticizing administration. I'm not getting political here, but my point is there are a couple of his comments that he made around not supporting this type of harm reduction stuff. And again, it's just interesting because other administrations have supported this. I mean, there was a tremendous growth of harm reduction activities in the last administration. So again, as I mentioned, I think a lot of this depends on who's in office and where it's going to go. I do not see improvements or enhancements or growth of harm reduction activities as it stands now. It just doesn't seem to be the focus. But some of these certainly do have very clear benefits. And again, the first one I'll go back to is being able to purchase syringes without a prescription. And, this is a public health issue. It's a reduction of bloodborne illness. Transmission of bloodborne illnesses. I mean, this is an easy one. This is one we shouldn't question. This is one we shouldn't give people a hard time about. Somebody, can I get a bag of syringes, insulin syringes? And somebody will respond, well, what are you using it for? Is it insulin? Let me see your insulin prescription. That's completely defeating the point. We shouldn't support that. Somebody comes in asking for syringes, we should give them to them. We are a public health clinician. We should be contributing to that. Wound care supplies, again, with the xylazine and alpha-2s has been a big one. And then again, naloxone's a no-brainer. We should be having those conversations. Fentanyl, xylazine test strips, another great thing to offer. We didn't have those until recently, especially the xylazine ones. Believe it or not, fentanyl test strips were illegal for people to carry in most states. And in some states, it still is. So again, these are very simple things from a public health perspective. I have no problem with any of those pieces. Again, just some of the, more advanced thinking in terms of safe injection facilities is kind of where I'm stuck a little bit, if I'm being absolutely honest. I'd love to see more data. I would support a pilot around doing that. But I'm going to always have to revert back to being a clinician versus an addict. Because that's the way we have to look at it. I can't let my personal feelings or concerns, kind of impede that. It's a clinical issue. All right, self-assessment question number 2. Which of the following is true regarding naloxone? Stigma is not a factor in obtaining naloxone. OTC availability increased utilization in community overdoses. Standing orders have positively impacted mortality, and it typically requires 4 or more 2 milligram Narcan doses to reverse fentanyl or naloxone. Yeah, good. I think people are kind of where it at. I think the only one that was a little ambiguous there for some people is, did OTC availability increase utilization in community overdoses? We don't know that for sure yet. May or may have not contributed, but we do know clearly we have data that says standing orders positively impacted overdose mortality. All right, let's wrap up by talking about stigma, and then I'll take a few questions. So, what exactly is stigma? It's defined as a mark of disgrace or infamy connected to a situation or a quality of a person. A mark that's not easy to escape from, to wash off, to separate yourself from. It has very clearly demonstrated detrimental effects on treatment outcomes, healthcare providers, treatments, research, policies, and society as a whole. Has tremendous negative effects on individuals with substance use disorder. And keep in mind that the language that we utilize and the attitudes we exhibit in clinical practice can have a good effect on perpetuating this stigma. So think about public perceptions, comments that people make about using drugs. And again, I'll use the recent announcements from this administration as an example. I was watching a live feed of Secretary Kennedy talking about the recovery initiative. And, half of the comments were great and supportive, and the others were, why would I listen to a junkie? Why would I listen to a former heroin addict? It's public perceptions. Once an addict, always an addict, which is crazy that we're still there with some of this. Media portrayals. Think of what the stereotypes are of people who use drugs. I think we've gotten a little better at this. There's some great movies that have been done in the past few years that I think have presented a pretty accurate portrayal of what dealing with substance use disorder looks like. But there are still many that, portray, the poor, disheveled individual, somewhere in a back alley, sleeping on the ground with a needle in their arm or a pipe in their mouth, Google pictures of an addict and see what comes up on Google Images. It's far from flattering, and I don't expect it to be flattering, but it's still very stereotyped. Social norms and contacts, interactions with mentors and preceptors. I mean, even I, before I entered treatment, was very negative towards individuals with substance use disorder. And I had some incredible preceptors, people I would consider mentors, people I consider father figures, that exhibited these types of opinions and attitudes. And I think a lot of it's generational, and I think a lot of it is experience. It took me a while into my recovery to understand that people with negative attitudes towards addiction were obviously affected by addiction themselves. Maybe it was a parent or a family member or a brother or a sister or a close friend. And I understand that. It's hard to shake that negative perception when you've been traumatized by that. Or lack of knowledge. Addiction is not part of our required curriculum. I'm sure it's no shocker. It's not part of any healthcare required curriculum at this point. So we're not educated on this. There have been studies done. This was a big one done in stigma, and healthcare professionals looked at over 1,500 citations. Many of them were international. Exhibited a general negative attitude towards patients with SUD, That was due to lack of education, training, and support structures, the perception that they're violent, they're manipulative, and they have poor motivation. Felt that addiction care should be provided by specialists, and were unwilling or unable to empathize with those patients. And then there was low levels of satisfaction that drove poor motivation to treat or engage. You see this a lot, even in people that work in addiction. There's a lot of turnover. It can be very frustrating for a lot of people because it takes people a while to find recovery and to maintain that. But there was a very clear positive attitude towards recovery itself. When we look at MOUD in particular, we now have 28 plus years of studies related to MOUD use in healthcare professionals' attitudes. It's all related to how it was implemented. The exposure. Were people involved with clinics or other initiatives that used MOUD? The level of training, which again we said is usually close to zero. And then your general knowledge of it. Even when I entered treatment, I was driven to learn about this because I reflected that I didn't know anything about addiction. And it was really kind of eye-opening to dive into that and find out the concept of disease and all the other history behind it. And other studies have clearly demonstrated that we have an abstinent treatment preference, having a large influence on the attitudes towards MOUD. Many people that provide addiction treatment or support have been through addiction themselves. And it can be positive or negative that they reflect the experiences they had on other people. So, for example, a lot of physicians in the field went through a physician's health program, like the program I went through at the board at the time, which was, exactly what I needed. But it's an abstinence-based program, or it was back then, especially for physicians. So they feel the way that they did it is the way the patients have to do it. And they don't tend to like MOUD for that reason, which to me is a very concerning and dangerous attitude. We talk about us as pharmacists. Studies demonstrate that we have a similar level of stigma to other healthcare professionals. We're not worse. Although we're generally accepting of the efficacy of these treatments, we still do exhibit stigma. Only about half of us report any SUD training in our career. And then clearly the separator was if you were involved in any provision of care for SUD patients, it reduced that stigma. No rocket science there. Engagement and support of harm reduction still varies widely in our field. I understand that. And then just the setup of community pharmacies, presents barriers that can perpetuate stigma as well. So how do we recognize shame that drives stigma? Well, obviously, look at the body language of your patients. Is their gaze directed downward or averted? Is their head lowered? Are they blushing? Are their shoulders slumped, chest narrowed, face touching? Be conscious of these things. And how do we interact? Well, we got to lose the judgment. If we have judgment towards these patients, I encourage you to reflect internally. Why is that? Educate yourself. If you don't believe addiction is a disease or why we call it a disease, take a look. I guarantee you'll be very surprised in many cases. Show concern and provide support. Never say you understand unless you do. And be ready to explain why you do understand if you've gone through it yourself or have a family member. But the best and the safest thing to do is to play the student role, and say outright, I don't have any experience with this, or I wasn't taught a lot about this in school, but I want to be here as a resource for you. I want to support you whatever way I can. So I'm always here to help you in your journey. Just let me know if you need some support, you have some questions, just kind of signal me and we can step over to the side and have a conversation. And make clear that offer to help is open-ended. Talk to these folks and guide them just as we do in other chronic disease states. There are some very simple things you can do to display your support. Just things you can leave on the counter. Lists of local 12-step meetings, lists of treatment programs or clinicians in the local area. That could be buprenorphine doctors, that can be opioid treatment programs, therapists, social workers, counselors. Links to telemedicine treatment programs. We can continue to do that and provide OUD treatment through telemedicine. There are many out there, and there are some that are excellent. If anybody wants recommendations, I'm always happy to provide. And any sort of general educational information about addiction. SAMHSA has some great stuff. NIDA has some great stuff. Again, it just shows that you support and that you're non-judgmental, and that can go a very long way into improving the care of these patients. So last but not least, self-assessment question number 3. Which of the following would not typically be helpful in mitigating stigma? Good. Yeah, telling them you understand. That's a tough one, again, unless you're comfortable having that conversation. And the other thing I'll say about that is don't ever be pressured to do that either. That's at your comfort level. So to wrap up, we can be a source of unbiased community information relative to substance use. We are obviously more than qualified to be able to recommend appropriate pharmacologic interventions. And please dispense those life-saving medications when prescribed and appropriate. I realize there are cases where it is not appropriate. Naloxone, naloxone, naloxone. I can't say it enough. Again, I think we've established ourselves as a great resource and source for naloxone. Let's continue to carry that and ensure a safe and welcoming clinical environment for patients suffering from any disease. And remember that asking for help is not a sign of weakness, but rather a demonstration of strength. My contact information is there. Anybody can reach out at any time, call, text, email, and that offer never expires. Again, I thank you guys all for your participation, for showing up, and for all that you do for your patients. It's always a pleasure to be with you. Thank you.